According to the front page of the November 3rd, 1985 edition of the Blue Ridge Beacon, the devil came to Blairsville Baptist. That shocking headline alone, strengthened by the infamous satanic panic that was sweeping the then conservative Reagan era, catapulted what was ultimately an isolated incident into the plethora of anecdotal evidence that America and its Judeo-Christian foundations were being eroded and invaded by ritualistic devil worshippers. For some, the Blairsville Judgment House incident, as it was called, was but a drop in the bucket compared to the reported 12,000 cases of the occult during its time. Others, however, persist that the sleepy town has never felt the same since. Some in this camp have even gone to move away from the area, citing the incident as their prime motivation. Pastor Douglas Michaels, head of the Blairsville Baptist Church, both then and now, is not one of those people.
I mean, absolutely it was sickening,
he says safely from behind his maplewood desk in his little office behind the fellowship hall.
But we here in Blairsville are a resilient bunch. The Lord's been faithful to us despite the stumbling blocks we faced.
Pastor Douglas nods with a faint smile. Despite being born and raised in his words, the great state of the Georgia peach, his accent is about as Kentucky fried as a 12-piece bucket of chicken. What about those who left?
Who's that? You mean the Dustin Girls folks?
Among others. He nods long and hard, then licks his chops.
They're good folks, Christian folks, but I don't blame them for leaving this place.
He taps his desk with his fingers like he was picking up an apple.
Memories, I reckon.
Do they ever haunt you too?
Of course. You think it doesn't pop into my head when I'm here alone at night? I mean, H.E. double hockey sticks. We fumigated the halls days after. But I suppose it's more than just the germs that could have lingered there.
He lets out a deep sigh and a shiver.
If I can help it, I steer clear. Nowadays, that room's mostly for our Sunday potlucks or the AA meetings anyway.
But back then it was used for the Judgment House.
Right,
Michael drawls. He smiles across his desk with closed lips until the steaming mug in his hands reaches them. It reads, World's Best Pasta, and from it he takes a loud chug. What is the Judgment House anyway? The supposed World's Best Pasta places the mug atop his maplewood desk with a dull thud.
Well, technically, we weren't the first church to do this whole Judgment House thing anyway. I believe it started in Florida, come to think of it. In a nutshell, it's kind of like one of those spook houses folks put on in their garages, only this one's more of an evangelism tool. Never got the appeal, but the kids loved it. At least, the few years we put it on, they did.
And that includes Stephanie Dustin. Michael nods.
Oh yeah,
he says.
Stephanie was one of our youth group's best leaders, in fact. Had a real connection with the kids, you know?
The pastor's smile erodes from his face to reveal a sadly solemn expression.
Darn shame what happened, he says, shaking his head. I suspect if it wasn't for Stephanie, we would have never put on that Judgment House in the first place.
And what about Chet Lancaster? Pastor Douglas's demeanor changes on a dime. He crosses his arms above his gut.
What about him?
Have you ever seen him since the incident? He nods.
I've seen him twice since. First time was right after it all happened. He was in the county juvenile detention, or whatever you call it, and I'd gone in on behalf of the church to visit. You know, to pray with him and such. The congregation didn't like that, though, especially not the Dustin Girls folks.
Why not? He lets out another sigh. This time his entire pudgy body trembles.
Some of the folks back then thought he might have been,
possessed?
Right.
Do you think he was possessed? Pastor Douglas sighs once more.
Our church's official position is that spiritual warfare can and will happen. To what extent? Well, that's the question, ain't it?
He hoarsely chuckles.
Some folks watch too many movies, I think. They see a kid lipping off to their folks, and they think their head's gone spinning.
What do you think?
Well, if you want to hear about demons crawling under your skin, I suggest you go down to St. Matthew's up the block. Might be a bit more sensational for your story. I'm not saying there ain't demons out there. Lord knows there's a whole spiritual plane we can't even see. But I think they work differently. They don't so much as possess as they influence.
So, do you think Chet Lancaster was influenced? Pastor Douglas thinks about his next words carefully, and then slowly begins to nod his head.
After that first visit to the jailhouse, I think so. He didn't want to be prayed for or nothing. Just wanted me to leave him alone. And in his eyes,
he shivers despite the officer's warmth.
There's nothing in him. Just nothing.
What about the second time you saw him? Pastor Douglas slowly swallows to the point where his spit audibly slides down his throat.
At the second time, he wouldn't pray with me again, wouldn't even talk to me. So I prayed by myself.
What did you pray for? A look of guilt washes over the pastor's face.
I prayed they wouldn't let him out.
Unfortunately for Pastor Douglas Michaels, the Lord did not answer his prayer. Chet Lancaster was released from the Union County Juvenile Detention Center only 3 months after the second meeting on account of good behavior, reducing his 7-month sentence by nearly a half. Meanwhile, Georgie Harris, a former congregant of Blairsville Baptist and, by extension, Pastor Douglas Michaels, would serve the entirety of his 4-year prison sentence under a conviction of negligent homicide.
I mean, yeah, technically Lancaster had nothing to do with it, on paper.
You seem to be implying something. George nods, his once-long hair documented eternally in both his mugshot photographs and the ones taken by the church volunteers prior to October 1985. No longer flaps as his head bobs. Instead, a military-styled buzz cut resumes its place.
If you poke a sleeping bear and it wakes up and mauls people, did the bear really kill him? Or did you?
The bear. George balks like a chicken.
Whatever. I know what I did, and I know what he did.
Which is? George sighs and rubs his hand through his hair.
He set me up.
And how exactly did he do that? George glares up at me with furrowed brows and an incredulous grin.
You want his side or something? He asks,
just playing the devil's advocate, so to speak. George replies.
Figures. Media had their bias since the get-go.
What do you mean? George looks at me sardonically.
I mean, like them failing to report all the weird shit he did right before it happened.
Such as? George puffs out a breath. It reeks of cheap beer.
Him going into the woods at night, parking his car outside her house. We were practically going steady at that point until I thought she might have been cheating on me with Sweaty Chetty.
Why'd you call him that?
Lancaster? Have you seen the guy? He's been sweating since he was born.
He chuckled grimly to himself.
Guess that's how we got out of the womb. Slippery son bitch.
Yet you're in a love triangle with him and Stephanie. George lets out a cackle and slaps the kitchen table with his palm.
Love triangle,
he repeats, mocking my tone.
The only love triangle Lancaster was ever a part of was between him, his mama, and God. And I bet God dropped out long before the incident.
He'd be lucky if he was in a love line.
So why suspect your then steady girlfriend was cheating if he wasn't a threat?
'Cause that's what women do, man, George says. His smile disappears at that point. It's their favorite game to play.
What is? George sighs and wipes his face. For calling George Lancaster sweaty, he sure is drenched in a perspiration of his own.
Steph and I were going through a bit of a rough patch.
Thought you were going steady, I interjected.
We were, he corrects me. Until Bobby Owen's homecoming party. Ever since we were on the rocks, and not in the fun way.
What happened at the party? He sighs and rubs his hands again through his non-existent hair.
Typical relationship bullcrap.
There's a smile spread across his face for a brief second before it disappears, just as quickly as it came.
I'd been talking to one of the girls in our class, okay? Hell, I don't even remember her name, that's how forgettable she was. What I do remember was that she was our teacher's pet. Got straight A's and everything, the whole 9 yards. That's why I was talking to her that night. We weren't flirting. He laughs nervously. I was trying not to fail geography. I don't know math.
Geometry?
Whatever. Steph swore up and down I was cheating on her and all the convincing in the world wouldn't change her mind. That's who Steph was, you see, headstrong. Just like her mother.
His eyes dart up and to the left and then settle back on me.
I even showed her the grade I got on that test about triangles. A C+. C+, he emphasizes. I never got a C+ on a math test.
Did she buy it? George's face droops at the sound of my question.
Did she believe me? He rephrases. When Sweaty Chetty started coming around after the party, I knew her answer.
She didn't. George shakes his head affirmatively. I think she was trying to make me jealous. And did she? Again, George swings his head.
It's the game, man. That's why Lancaster was invited to be a part of the Judgment House that year. That's why I got so pissed off.
And that's when you slashed her tires. The man before me catches his breath midair. Somewhere behind him, a wall clock ticks impatiently. He nods feverishly.
But I didn't think she'd fucking ride him for Christ's sakes.
But she did, I reply. He agrees with a silent series of nods. Much like Pastor Douglas Michaels, I hear him swallow audibly.
Women drivers, am I right?
He grins painfully at me. I don't smile back. Donna Dustin, on the other hand, smiles brightly. In fact, her face seemingly beams the warm lamplight of her cozy living room. Through the blinds, there's a similarly shaded glow of orange-yellow as the sun sets on the sleepy neighborhood of Ducktown, Tennessee. Blairsville, and its Baptist church of the same name, resides some 30 miles southeast on the opposite side of the state line. Despite the busy bustle of the neighborhood, just beyond the blinded window behind her, Donna Dustin's porch light is not lit, and no candy awaits the dozens of trick-or-treaters scurrying about in the night. Halloween night. I make a gesture towards the window, beyond it. You don't celebrate anymore? Donna's smile remains.
Never did, sweetie.
Then what about Judgment House? Donna sighs and looks around the room for an answer. Instead of orange and black decorations and the occasionally smiley-faced pumpkin, the walls are scattered with wooden crosses and family photographs, some of which feature her late daughter Stephanie Dustin. These photos are much older than the rest.
The Judgment House was Stephanie's idea, Donna explains. Her father and I never wanted her to go to those, as they call them, haunted houses. But we knew Stephanie's friends always went without her. Then when we started attending Blairsville and heard about the whole Judgment House thing, my then husband supposed it was a fair compromise. She'd get dressed up and, well, do whatever they do on that night. But it'd be under the supervision of the church and Pastor Doug.
You know, some people say this night is a Christian one, All Hallows Eve. Donna nods as if she had expected such a response. She probably had gotten it before.
That's because the church tries its best to cover up the true origins. Just like Christmas, even Easter. Halloween is a pagan night. Make no mistake, mister.
You're talking about Samhain, I say, and Donna agrees. I'm surprised she heard the word before.
Like you, I too do my research,
she says with a single nod. Even in the dim light, I noticed now that her face is all dolled up with the bright red lipstick and rose-red blush. Perhaps she expected an interview captured on camera, or maybe she was simply as old-fashioned as her ideals. I'm about to ask a follow-up question when Donna cuts me off.
All I'll say, sir, is if tonight is as holy,
she air quotes,
of a night as I've come to believe, I have no doubts Mr. Lancaster will be in full celebration.
Her statement is a perfect segue. So you think Chet Lancaster is a devil worshipper? Donna squawks out an ironic chuckle.
I know he is, she clarifies. You think any God-fearing person would have done what he did? Sure, Georgie Harris slashed the tires, but the boy was angry and seeing red. The hot temper shows great foolishness, you know? That's a proverb. Yes, it was a horrible accident, but I've forgiven him.
What about Chet Lancaster? Donna thinks. Beneath her makeup, her face wrinkles.
As best as I humanly can forgiving him, yes. You have to keep in mind, sir, that display haunts me. I see it in my dreams, my nightmares.
You're referring to the Judgment House?
What Chet Lancaster did to it, yes,
she answers.
What he did to her. All under the guise of that awful mask.
The devil mask? Donna nods apprehensively. She then takes a long glance at the photograph of Stephanie on the wall.
He really got into that role, Stephanie told me.
When was this?
A few weeks before the accident,
Donna explains.
When they were doing rehearsal.
They rehearsed the Judgment House?
Oh, sure,
Donna nods.
It required a lot of acting, apparently. Nothing we weren't used to in our household, though. Stephanie was a regular thespian. Quite good, too.
At this point, Donna tears up, and her eyes fade to red.
Shame she couldn't follow her dreams, you know.
Donna excuses herself and then clears her throat. She continues in a shakier tone.
From what I saw, she was playing one of those sinners. The people that go to hell when they die. And she had gotten Chet to play the devil. I guess the boy was socially awkward and wanted to be a part of it. Apparently he was a thespian too. Real method actor, though.
How so? Donna smiles a bit, and then it completely vanishes.
Steffi told me that he'd been a part of their Easter production that spring. I guess he had played one of the Jesuses. They had multiple of different scenes, and had fasted for a week before the show. Starved himself, more or less, from what Stephanie said.
Why's that? Donna shrugs.
To get into character, I guess. Year before he did the same thing for that production, I think the church's version of A Christmas Carol, he was nothing but an extra. A week before the show started, he broke his leg but insisted to be in it.
I squint at her questioningly. She continues.
He had been cast as one of the poor people on the street, a crippled one with a crutch like Tiny Tim, you know?
Her eyes widen at this point.
Steffi said there was a rumor going around that he broke his leg himself just to walk with a hobble.
Tiny Tim didn't have a broken leg. He was ill.
And so was Chet Lancaster,
she exclaims.
But not just sick in the head,
she says, pressing a red-nailed fingertip into a temple.
But ill in the spirit. The man needs Jesus.
So, do you think he's possessed? Donna takes an exasperated breath.
I don't see how he couldn't be. I mean, he desecrated the grave, the church, stalked my daughter, used her body like that. And I know Georgie must have told you about how they saw him going out into the woods all by his lonesome. I know the kind of witchcraft they do out there in the Appalachians. So, yeah, he's possessed all right. Or, at least, he was.
I nod. Pastor Michaels didn't think so.
No?
She asks, her brows furrow. He said Lancaster was influenced, but not possessed. Donna's face expands from its narrowed, curious gaze. Now it becomes fuller and sadder.
I could believe that,
she says. Her tone indicates that, for her, the issue is resolved, and her follow-up questions suggest as much.
When was your interview with the pastor?
2 days ago? Donna nods agreeably.
And what about Georgie?
Yesterday.
Oh, Lord Jesus,
she gasps.
You just missed it.
Missed what?
The fire.
Donna explains.
Happened last night. I only know because I've kept in touch with the Harrises and got the call this morning. They didn't tell you?
Tell me what? Donna sighs and braces herself.
Georgie is dead,
she says, holding back tears.
They found his body all burnt up in his house. What was left of it, anyway.
What time was that? When did they find him?
About 9:30 last night.
Jesus.
Yes, may Jesus be with his soul. Amen.
So where do you think he is now? Donna is caught off guard by my question.
Where he is?
She asks for clarity. I nod. Well, I suppose his folks are arranging his funeral. If he's not in the casket by now, I bet they've got him down at the city morgue. I watch her shudder at the thought, as though she were reliving the old haunted memory. Do you think he's in hell? Her eyes bulge.
Goodness, no!
She exclaims.
What kind of question is that?
He's responsible for your daughter's death.
My daughter's death was an accident,
she says firmly.
I know Georgie was upset with her, that much is obvious, but he'd never want to hurt her, much less...
Her voice trails off. Kill her? Donna nods without looking at me.
What wasn't an accident is what Chet Lancaster did.
Which was? The beam from Donna's face is gone now.
Don't you already know?
Humor me. She takes in a long breath and her face reddens.
He dug up my daughter and brought her body to the church. Our church.
Donna lets out a heavy breath.
There. You happy?
What did he do with her? Donna's voice trembles.
It wasn't her anymore,
she clarifies.
It was just her body, a husk.
Well, what did he do with her body then? Like the others, I hear a gob of spit glide down Donna's throat.
You know darn well what he did.
I want to hear it from you.
Well, I don't want to talk about it,
she says, shaking her head passionately. Tears begin to stream down her cheeks. I know he hung her up in the hell room, right? Covered her up in plastic Halloween chains, globe streetlights.
Yes, I know what he did,
she exclaims, cutting me off.
I'll never forget it as long as I live. Her body all mangled up as it was. The embalmers did what they could, but the accident left her all.
She shakes her head.
And of course, I had to be the one to identify her. See her like that?
I nod. Do you think she's still there? Donna looks up at me with tear-filled eyes that shake as she speaks.
Still where?
In hell. Donna gasps in disgust.
Why on earth would you ask me that?
She shakes her head furiously.
What paper you're even with anyway?
Who said I was with a paper?
You said you wanted it.
She starts to say, but then stops cold in her tracks. Again, I hear her swallow. Let me ask you again, Mrs. Dustin. Do you think your daughter Stephanie is in hell right now? The next breath that escapes her comes from Donna's nose alone.
I think you should leave, sir.
I think I'll leave you the way I left Pastor Michaels.
How's that?
I shrug. They'll find out tomorrow morning. He's still in his office, I bet. Shame they'll have to fumigate the place again. Hot breath from Donna's nose fills the cold air between us.
And Georgie? I'm guessing you killed him too.
You'd call it killed.
What would you call it?
I thought about her question carefully, supposing it might be the last one she'd ever ask. Earlier you brought up Sam Hain. You said you did your research. You remember that? Donna nods carefully, a look of realization is plastered across her face. Then you might remember the bonfires. The sacrifices.
Witchcraft.
Donna hushes. I nod. I mean, Chet said George would burn fast and bright. And boy, did he. Donna chokes out.
Chet sent you.
I nod again.
Why not do this all himself, then? Why now?
I guess you could say the stars have aligned, I tell her. They've aligned for us, for Chet. And that's why he couldn't be here, to see you face to face. He's busy preparing.
For what?
Tonight. I can hear Donna actively holding her breath. He wanted me to assure you that none of this was personal. All just part of the plan.
Whose plan?
Donna asks. I'm about to answer, but she answers herself.
I know whose plan.
Donna sighs, but before she can catch her breath, I stand from the couch across the living room, no longer cozy.
All this over the Judgment House?
She asks, frantically, as if pushing out the words. I can't help but grin and remove the dagger Chet had given me from my coat pocket. This is the Judgment House. First and foremost, I'm going to cut to the chase. Yes, the tyrant I'm referring to was some form of dinosaur. And no, it wasn't the only prehistoric animal that decided to show up unannounced within our time. It hasn't been long since I had my own encounter, so I am still lost in how I should process everything that transpired. Before I go into detail, I should preface that I was aware that I am not the only person to have these encounters, as I have read these stories online that people from around the world have shared. There might be hundreds of them by now, and the media has likely picked up on them. Without any more delay, I shall share my own story. It all started when summer was ending. My sister-in-law, whom we're going to call Amy, had called my wife, is now named Sophie, to tell us about the exciting news that she'd won 2 tickets for a 2-week stay at a luxurious hotel in Venice.
She also said she wanted to use the other ticket to bring my wife along, to make up for the fact that they live far from each other. My wife, of course, said yes after consulting me about it because she admittedly felt bad staying in one of the most famous cities in Europe while I would be home alone for a fortnight. I assured her I didn't mind. I just wanted her to have a good time after she had double shifts. The only problem that arose was who would be looking after Amy's house while she was away, as she lived in a very remote area within the woodlands of Virginia and the Appalachians. Thus, she had no neighbors. The closest people who lived next to her were very old, and she didn't want to bother them. That wasn't until Sophie had suggested I could look after her house once we had convinced our next-door neighbor of house-sitting our own home. As a city man who had never tended to travel past a tree line, I was reluctant to be so far into such a renowned forest, but my sister-in-law had also done me a massive favor some years ago, so I suppose I owed her. After packing for the 2-week stay, my sister-in-law came down to drive me up from the city to her house, which was considerably far from the city of Richmond. I'm not going to dox my sister-in-law, but she does live far from everyone else. On the drive, Sophie and I followed Amy's truck in our car, and the longer we didn't see another car, the stronger the urge to turn around and get someone else to house sit grew. There weren't a lot of signs people lived out here, and though I got that Amy wasn't a people person, this was too isolating. Sixth Sense must have told Amy that I was worried, so she called me over the phone and tried to ease the fear I had by quickly debunking a lot of the perceptions. She saw why people say where she lived was creepy, but there's really nothing I should worry about. Feral people did not exist. The animals living around here should leave people alone, and there was no Bigfoot or anything called the hide-behind. I didn't know what a hide-behind was until she told me, and that only made me more scared. It's a good thing my wife just reassured me that the internet connection was still strong, and I still had contact through that. The house was rather decent, and more like a summer home. It was bordered by trees, 2 stories tall with an extension on the west wing, and it held one of those large sliding window doors that took up most of the wall, so you're facing the garden that was twice the size of most I'd ever seen. Once I brought all my bags inside and got settled, Sophie gave me a kiss, Amy hugged me, and they drove off in my car and left me with the pickup truck. The second I couldn't see or hear the car anymore, a weighted silence pressed down on me. It was just paranoia at the time, masking the peaceful nature into something more sinister. I wasn't someone who explored the woods much. Even when I was a kid who had an active imagination like any other youth, there wasn't any motive to explore the area. If Amy said it was safe, then it was safe, and I didn't need to make sure. Once I went into the house, I intended to stay there. Unlike most people, the first thing I did was use my phone to call my friends who were still in Richmond. There was nothing much to talk about since I had seen all of them literally the day before, but other than the internet to keep myself occupied, there wasn't much to do other than watch TV. By the time the sun had gone down, I had probably talked the ears off of at least 4 of the people in my contacts, and decided my voice needed a little break. I went to the living room to sit down and watch some TV, making sure to avoid horror or anything that would get my nerves worked up. The Comedy Channel, I watched a bunch of stand-ups there. They were not very funny, but being bored was better than being anxious. But it didn't help that the giant window was only a few feet away from where I was sitting. Every other minute I caught myself side-eyeing the garden and listening in too intently, keeping at this until I just pulled the curtains shut and blocked out any view of the dark. I would open them in the morning though, as I had respect for the natural light. And that night, I was snuggled down in the guest bedroom, but found it difficult to sleep. I was a man in his 40s, yet for some reason, I felt like a kid who watched horror movies every day. When I got a good night text from Sarah and a picture of the hotel she was sharing with Amy, I realized that I had never really been alone before. I had a lot of siblings and a lot of friends. Thus, there was no real time when I was isolated from another person, so I guess I was just not used to the new environment. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. I would wake up, call Sarah to talk about how the holiday was going, ask what Venice was like, and say how happy I was she was having a good time. Then I would call a friend or a co-worker who caught on to my frequent contact and were nice enough to roll with it, and told me random things that happened that day or facts they had learned. By this point, the fear I had began to fade, and a sense of ease started to settle in. If there was no one I was to call, I would just spend the entire day on the internet. But on the 4th day, I came across something strange. It was a week-old story about a man who had tried to pull off some stunt by cycling the entire length of Argentina, and along the way, he claimed to have been attacked by the devil. Yet the crazy thing was, people in the comments section of the story claimed that he was attacked by a dinosaur called the Carnotaurus. Of course, I just assumed it was completely fake. Not to sound mean, but why would the devil find that much interest in a random cyclist in Argentina? If I were the devil, the Pope would be the first person I would aim my pitchfork at. Then I came across another story on the same premise. Some guy in Utah went camping and got attacked by these giant raptors, Utah raptors, and they had apparently mimicked his voice like a parrot. And the second I read that part, I clicked off and decided to watch anything else because I did not need that on my mind. Mimicry was a hunting tactic, one utilized by many of the scary monsters and other creatures in tales in the Appalachians. That night I pulled the curtains on the large sliding doors extra tight, but before I did, I glanced into the dark of the forest that surrounded the house. The trees seemed a lot closer now, like the garden shrunk, while the forest expanded and crept up onto the property. In that moment of gazing into the shadows and the outlines of the wild Virginia, there could be anything out there, and I wouldn't even know. There could be something else staring right back at me, and I wouldn't even know. Some horrid stillness settled at that thought, and I shut the curtains and left. I had another week and a half left, and any progress in feeling comfortable was gone. I felt more afraid than ever. The rational part of my mind knew that dinosaurs had not come back somehow, but those stories felt too real. Like, despite how ridiculous it was, there was some authentic feel to it. Or that was just paranoia talking again. The next morning, I woke up late, feeling like I had a wild night. I was so tired, in a cold sweat, and decided to take the 40-minute drive down to the small town to pick up some food and spend the day there. Being surrounded by people again sounded splendid. Before getting up, I spent the morning and some time after having a long call with Sarah. We talked about how her holiday was going, how I've been, and how much we've missed each other. She noticed how I sounded and asked me if anything was wrong, but I just laughed and said I acted stupid and watched a horror movie the night before, so I didn't get much sleep. Hearing her laugh was the best part of that day. She told me to take it easy if I was deprived of sleep, and just be careful if I went down to the city. There was an ice cream parlor that Amy had recommended, and the day just got a little bit brighter. We said our I love yous and hung up. After taking a quick shower, brushing my teeth, I got changed and went down to make a small breakfast in the kitchen. When I opened the curtains and expected to see the same calm view of the garden, the plate from my hand fell and clattered to the floor. Every single muscle in my body made me jump back, and I gasped so loud it might as well have been a scream. I felt as though my eyes were about to pop out of my head from how wide they had went. There was a dinosaur standing on the porch in the garden. It seems those stories were telling the truth. When I jumped back in shock, the dinosaur did the same, both of us not expecting to see each other. I got a good look at it as it stared right back at me. It didn't have horns, so it wasn't like that Carnotaurus, and those Utah raptors were orange and striped like tigers. But this was black and green, like an army uniform or a monitor lizard that I saw on TV the other day. It was the same size of a car and around 7 meters long. The arms were small with 2 fingers, and the body was strong and long-legged. It backed away from the window, unable to comprehend what it was seeing. What was I seeing? How was it here? Why was it here? What should I do? What will it do? The dinosaur watched me. The dinosaur watched me, opening its mouth to hiss at me like an angry crocodile, the breath fogging up the glass. It then went at me, only to bump into the glass and make the entire frame wobble at the impact, shaking me out of my shocked stupor. Oh, hell! I ran to the front door, snatching my keys and sprinting outside. I made it to the truck and got inside, putting the keys in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. But just as I started to reverse out, the truck jolted when the dinosaur came around the corner and crashed into the side. The sudden impact made me steer off to the side, and the back of the truck got stuck over the edge of a boulder, the back wheels spinning a foot above the ground. Dazed, I began honking on the horn, the blaring sound making the creature back away, shaking its head and hissing. Once it backed away and darted into the trees, I got out of the truck and tried to push behind it, only to find it was wedged. With my getaway stuck, I had no choice but to sprint back inside the house. Almost tumbling down the stairs when I ran up, I barged into the guest bedroom, snatched up my phone, and called the police. You bet the conversation went like this after I gave out the location. There was a dinosaur trying to get into my house, my sister-in-law's house. Get down here with guns! The dispatcher was quiet.
What was trying to get in? Can you repeat that, sir?
A dinosaur is trying to get in.
A dinosaur? Sir, you are aware that prank calls are illegal and a Class 1 misdemeanor that can serve up to a year in prison?
I'm not playing around, I shouted back at them.
Have you been drinking today, sir?
No.
Are you on any medication?
Feeling beyond exacerbated, I stomped my foot down hard on the floor. For God's sake, no! Fine then. Someone in a really convincing dinosaur costume is trying to get in. Just please send a whole squad down. They're banging against the glass door in the backyard. The dispatcher paused for a second time.
We have someone on their way. Can you stay on the line for me?
I sighed in relief, then jumped when there was another heavy thud on the sliding doors, my hand resting over my heart racing. Darting to the bedroom window, I looked down to see the dinosaur back away and begin circling the garden. It sniffed at the porch and the fence, as if it had just as much confusion on arrival as I did. I asked them, "How long will they be?"
Due to your location and an unexpected traffic jam from an incident, it could take over an hour. Can you stay on the line for me?
I felt my heart drop at the thought of waiting that long for them to come and save me. I can't, I need to call my wife.
I understand. Just stay somewhere safe, okay?
She said, not sounding as urgent as I wanted. I will, thank you. Once I hung up, I kept my eye on the dinosaur as I called Sarah, but she didn't pick up, and it went straight to voicemail. She must have been busy or occupied with her holiday, and I felt dread sink in. When the dinosaur turned its head up to look at me, I ducked and backed away, but it went to voicemail as it did before. Come on, pick up! I looked over to the computer in the room. I felt a spark of curiosity under all my fear. Sitting down, I turned the computer on and did some quick research to find out what exactly was trying to kill me. It looked like a young Tyrannosaurus Rex at first, but in searching for that, I came across what I was looking for. Appalachiosaurus, a late Cretaceous theropod that was small but quick and just as lethal as the much larger cousin who calls himself King. Up 7 meters in length and 1,300 pounds, with teeth meant to rip off chunks of meat that could have killed me easily. It was also a pursuit predator, which made running for it a no-go. I glanced back at the window and decided to get up, turn on my camera, and record the creature. It was just standing in the garden, sniffing the air before it looked up at me again and stared. From this view, I noticed that the head of the dinosaur was mostly this dark green, and it had these bluish spectacle spots around its eyes. Once I captured enough footage with my own commentary, I sent the video to my Sarah, Amy, and my family group chat, and my friends. Responses came quickly, some asking what was going on or if this was some YouTube video I was making, and 2 claiming how they heard those stories from people encountering dinosaurs themselves. That's when Sarah finally called me back.
"What is that thing? Are you okay?"
"I'm fine," I told her. "I'm just trying to hold out until the police get here. I just need to tell you what's happening." Sarah made a sputtering sound of confusion.
"That's not real, is it? An actual dinosaur? This isn't funny. You're scaring me."
I let out some ironic laugh and watched the tyrant retreat towards the tree line and lingered just enough for me to see it lying down next to the trees. You know I'm the last person to make this kind of joke. Listen, I'm sorry for making you all worried during your vacation. I'll be fine. Just stay with your sister and I'll call you later when I'm back in town. My wife let out a shuddering breath.
"Okay. Be safe. I love you."
"I love you too." Hanging up, I checked the time. It's been just over half an hour. Oh, hell. Thinking of ways to defend myself in case things went south, I searched through the second level of the house. The kitchen had knives, but animals had a clear view inside of the room, and I didn't want to draw its attention. Those cops better have guns. My sister-in-law's late husband had his old wooden baseball bat in their room, and though I wasn't an athlete myself, I reckoned I could swing pretty hard on the tyrant's head, knocking a tooth out or fracturing an orbital bone. I waited. The bat held tight in my shaking fist, and my gaze set hard on the tree line. The animal's head was just about seen within the vegetation, and we had to stare down. I could barely see the eyes, but just make out the golden brown within the black skin on its brow. I saw more than just an animal. Not to project on it, but it looked just as curious to see me as I was of it. But it may have been curious what I tasted like on top of that. My eyes trailed up to the woods beyond, like a vast sea of trees and untamed wilderness. What other creatures could be stalking those same woods? Another dinosaur or something worse? Glancing back down, I froze when I couldn't see the thing anymore. I imagined it circling the house like a shark, trying to find a way to get in and get to me. That's when I heard a car roll up on the pavement. I felt a mix of excitement and relief, and I quickly made it to Amy's room to look out the window to see. To my dismay, only a single standard police car and only a single officer stepping out. Panic again surged through me when it was apparent my call wasn't taken seriously. "No, no!" I ran down the stairs and opened the door before the officer could knock. He was a man in his 30s, clean-shaven and fit. In my panic, I stepped out once with the baseball bat and began beckoning him. "Get inside! Come on! Hurry!" The officer looked alarmed. After all, he had came here being called about a dinosaur stalking me, and I came out with a weapon in my hands, shouting for him to get inside. It probably didn't help that I wasn't white. "Sir," the officer shouted and stepped back, hand up in defense. "Put the weapon down." "Come on, man, get inside. It probably knows you're here," I called out to him again. "Put the bat down. Now. Put your hands in the air and get on your knees." I just wanted to scream at him at that moment. I probably looked like a lunatic, but this was not the time. With much reluctance, I stepped away from the door, and the officer didn't like that. He pulled out his gun. "Sir, I will not be asking again." The officer then froze as he looked off to my right. I followed his gaze. The Appalachiasaurus stalked past the extension of the house, sniffing the air, and looked between us with interest. It then darted towards me. I screamed, slamming the door shut, just before the dinosaur reached me. The sound of gunfire rang in the air, followed by the officer shouting and the dinosaur snarling. I looked through the small window at the side of the door to see if the beast had gotten between the man and his car, but when he tried to run back to the front door, the animal easily cut him off with a swift, long stride. I watched as the officer made a run for it, sprinting away as fast as he could. The dinosaur in hot pursuit, with some bullet wounds on its side and one on the snout. Walking down the hall toward the kitchen and living room, the officer appeared at the glass, banging on it, pleading for me to let him inside. I'd never seen so much terror before. But before I could make a move to save him, the tyrant came charging, raced up the porch, pouncing right onto the man, smashing through the glass. I let out a shout as the loud shattering filled my ears, the shards spilling onto the ground like water. One shard flew up and struck me in the eye, and I swung the bat around wildly in a desperate effort. The officer began to scream for help as the beast snarled and attacked him. My half-blinded vision making out his shoulders being chomped down on by the dinosaur's teeth. Unable to see or fight, there wasn't much for me to do. With all the regret in the world, I ran back up the stairs just as I heard the most sickening sound of a chunk of flesh being ripped away. I reached the bathroom and locked myself in, dropping the bat and checking the mirror. Blood filled my vision. I reached up to pull the shard out. By some miracle, it just missed my eye, leaving a cut on the side of my nose. But not having my eye taken out didn't ease me too much. A creature was in the house, eating someone. With fewer and fewer options, things just went from bad to worse. In that moment, when I cleaned the wound and dabbed it dry, a wild idea popped into my head. Taking a plastic disposable bag from the small bin in the bathroom, I filled it with bleach and then removed the lid from the ammonia bottle, then using tape to tie it to the bag. You know those videos where they get a balloon with Mentos and put it over a bottle of cola, then flip the balloon over to drop the Mentos in? Well, I was doing something similar. I was going to carry the bleach bag and bottle of ammonia around, ready to mix them and make chlorine gas in case the dinosaur got the drop on me. I called the police again, my heart racing in my chest.
911? What's your emergency?
It was the same dispatcher as before. It's me again, the dinosaur guy, and the guy you sent is dead. The dinosaur got him. I heard a sharp inhale of air and a keyboard being typed on.
Did you get into an altercation with the officer, sir?
No, the dinosaur killed him, I said slowly into the phone. Before I could hear a response, there was a sudden commotion at the other end of the line. Gasps and loud exclamations of surprise. The dispatcher I was speaking to had another conversation. When I tried to call out to them, they returned with a voice that was shaky and low.
Sir, do you know where the dinosaur is now?
I didn't ask what made them believe me. It's in my kitchen. It broke through the glass.
And Officer Robinson?
If that's the man who came here, he's dead. The thing's eating him.
The thing?
I let out a sigh. Appalachiasaurus. I looked it up, and that's what I think it is. There was another pause, and the dispatcher sounded very uneasy. After the pregnant silence, she spoke again.
We are dealing with another situation at this moment. We'll try to send anyone down as soon as we can. Just try to hide until then. Can you tell me where you're at now?
I'm in the bathroom upstairs.
Is the dinosaur big enough to climb the stairs?
I felt a chill at that question, and my heart leapt into my throat. Oh hell, I think so. It might hear me. I need to hang up. It sounded as though the dispatcher shuddered, and though she tried to stay professional, there was no denying how scared she sounded. Okay. Stay safe. I hung up and stuffed my phone in my pocket, facing towards the door. The thought of calling my wife again passed through my mind, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. So I sat down on the toilet and waited, the bat and chemical weapon within my reach. My phone then buzzed, and I quickly looked to see that it was my friends that were spamming videos and links to live news coverage of the area and the town close by. When I checked to see what it was about, I damn near dropped my phone. The aforementioned roadblock did not come from an accident. A line of police cars was shown on a road that led into the further countryside, and the vast forests of Virginia were seen. And I remember passing through that exact location when I first arrived. A large mass of brown came barreling through and tossed a car aside. A furious groan heard even with the phone speakers turned down low, before the animal was seen charging down the road. The helicopter news camera caught sight of a giant woolly mammoth, causing a rampage and now heading down the general direction I was. To take a breath and ground myself, I put the phone away and rocked back and forth, holding my head in my hands. At that time, I wondered to God what was going on. Not only are dinosaurs showing back up, but now Ice Age behemoths are disturbing the peace. I don't know how long I stayed in that bathroom for. An hour or more? It felt like years. I thought I was going to die, but now, who knew? I could try to climb out the bathroom window to escape, or fall to my death, or even starvation if no one ever came. With some curiosity, I took my phone out again to see if there was any more of those stories I could see. Tyrannosaurus Rex in Yellowstone, the American lions in Montana, and Hexagopteryx in Romania, North America, South America, and Europe. The reality of these animals being brought back from extinction began to weigh down, and some sense of dread that felt new and primal tightened in my chest. Just then, the sound of something heavy began to climb the stairs. I heard the sound of a picture being knocked off as it fell to the ground. Oh, hell. From bad to worse, I again thought of a plan to get bottles of soap and shampoo in the bathroom to cover myself and pour more of it under the crack of the door. By the time I smelled like a smoothie, the intruder was just outside making some chuttering sound. I heard it sniffing the ground, grumbling deep in its throat. The door rattled, like it was pressed against by the large body. I shook like I was being interrogated by a giant. The big predator was then heard stepping into the room next to the bathroom, which was Amy's room. Something in my head told me this was my chance to escape. With the bat and chemical weapon in one hand, I reached over and opened the bathroom door as quietly as possible. The dinosaur was out of sight, rummaging through the bedroom with the door wide open. I breathed in, gritting my teeth, and sprang out, grabbing onto the bedroom and slamming the door shut with a resounding bang. Without sparing a second longer, I sprinted down the stairs and into the kitchen. The body of Officer Robinson lay torn to shreds on the ground in a pool of blood and gore, his clothes tattered and torn. A hot stench made my eyes water and my stomach churned painfully. Why didn't you just listen to me, man? A loud thump from upstairs pulled me back from the sickening scene, and I went to work. Kneeling in the blood, I searched through his pockets until I found his keys. I went to leave before taking one last sorry look at the man who died, but that was again cut short when I heard the bedroom door being broken open. Swinging the front door open, I raced outside and sprinted to his car just as I heard the dinosaur give chase. When I reached the cruiser, I unlocked the door and was about to step in when the tyrant came charging out from around the house and raced aboard me with frightening speeds. its jaws open wide, revealing large, blood-stained, knife-like teeth. With my own surge of rage, I grabbed the bottle of ammonia and poured it into the bag of bleach, mixing it around before I spun it in my hand and let it fly out like a sling. With a big, wet smack, the bag hit the predator right in its face just a few bounds away from me, and it came to a skidding halt. The mix splashed around the dinosaur's head and the ground, sizzling and already leaving a strong, painful smell. Squawking like a giant bird, the intruder waved its head around furiously as its senses were attacked before it started to stumble over toward me. Timing it up, I picked up the bat and swung it as hard as I could to the side of its head. The bat splintered and snapped in two. My hands stung, and the tyrant stumbled again, with chicken legs, groaning and backing away for good toward the house. Not waiting for it to come back, I got into the car and floored it down the road. My heart was racing in my chest, the adrenaline coating my tongue, and once the house was out of sight, I started screaming, swearing, and crying. Never in my life would I have thought to have some Jurassic Park-style horror experience. The closest I had ever been to being attacked by a wild animal was when a seagull tried to take a burger I was eating. Parts of me felt bad for leaving Amy's house behind, but I only thought about getting out and figuring out what to do next. I looked back over my shoulder in case I was being pursued, and when I faced the road again, I slammed my foot on the brakes. The car came scraping through the dirt and stopped right at the foot of the woolly mammoth. The enormous beast let out an angry trumpet sound. I gawked at the sight of the hairy elephant, with its thick fur and tusks that were like small white trees attached to its face. When I tried to reverse away, the mammoth bowed down its massive head and heaved the front of the car up with its tusks and trunk, flipping me over. I screamed when the roof of the cruiser crashed onto the ground, the glass windows shattered and my head whipping back and forth. Upside down, I managed to spot the mammoth stalking away into the brush and disappearing. Feeling blood rushing to my head and dizzy from that violent jostling, I reached up to my belt, fell on the ceiling of the car, and pushed open the door that had become ajar after the car was flipped. I stood up just as a few police cars rolled up. They started to pour out and spread over the area, shouting orders, scanning the trees, and coming over to me. "Identify yourself!" an older man shouted. After I did, another cop stepped over. "That's Robinson's car. Where is he?" I felt a wave of anxiety and told them the truth. "He's dead. The dinosaur killed him. I took his car because my truck got stuck when I tried to escape." The police either cringed or protested against me, as if I were the one who had killed him. Eventually, one of them offered to drive me back for questioning, whilst the others tried to keep track of the mammoth, and a few wanted to investigate my claims about the Appalachiosaurus. When we reached the town and I was brought into the station, I felt the fatigue of the day and collapsed in a chair. I was read my rights, asked if I needed a lawyer, but I just wanted some time to breathe and call Sarah, so I went through the whole interrogation process as fast as I could. They believed me, thank God, and I was let go. I stayed in a motel in the town and had the longest, strangest, most relieving phone call of my life. Sarah and Amy were crying into the phone, and I really hated to mention I broke the latter's husband's bat. That gave her pause, and she didn't say a word after. I didn't sleep that night, and neither did Sarah. We stayed on the phone talking. She said she wanted to come back early and have Amy stay at our place since her home was now a crime scene, and I agreed. I don't know what will happen now. As I write this back in my home in Richmond, waiting for my wife and sister-in-law to land back into the US, no longer feeling safe in the world I thought I knew. First, they appeared deep in the woods. then in the national parks, then on the roads, in fields, and on farms. And now, they're showing up at our own homes. By the time the sun slid behind the Appalachian ridgeline, a strange quiet had already settled over the forest, as if nature itself were listening. Miles didn't notice it at first. He was too busy trying to keep up with Owen and Tessa on the narrow trail, and too winded to think about anything except how much he regretted letting two British strangers talk him into a weekend hike. Owen walked ahead with the easy confidence of someone who had spent too much time in the outdoors for his own good, whistling a tune that never seemed to resolve. Tessa followed a step behind him, her pack bouncing as she picked her way through the briars and moss-slick roots, muttering commentary under her breath each time she stumbled. Miles trailed behind them both, watching the last rays of daylight snag on the distant slopes like torn threads. They had met barely a week earlier, Owen and Tessa backpacking their way through the States, Miles serving as the unfortunate local they latched onto after asking for hiking recommendations in a grocery store parking lot. He hadn't meant to join them, he just meant to point them to the trailhead. And yet here he was, 3 hours into the hills, sweating through his shirt and privately wondering if he'd made the kind of terrible decision people on missing persons flyers make. Still, it wasn't until Owen stopped his whistling that Miles realized something had changed. "D'you hear that?" Owen asked, head tilted toward the darkening valley. Tessa frowned. "Hear what?" "Exactly." The forest wasn't silent. Silence would have been comforting, almost peaceful. No, this was different. The woods were watchful. Not a single bird call. No hum of insects. Not even the wind threading through the spruce needles. The air hung still, the kind of stillness that drapes itself over a place after something has disturbed it. Miles felt the hair on his arms rise. "It wasn't like this earlier." "No," Owen murmured, eyes narrowing. "It wasn't." Tessa shifted her weight, suddenly uneasy. "Animals go quiet when there's a predator around, don't they?" Miles gave a tight laugh. "Yeah, like bears." Owen didn't laugh. That or something else. A breeze finally stirred then. Thin, cold, almost metallic, carrying with it the faintest echo of something from deeper on the trail. Not a howl or a scream, but something in between. Something stretched thin and wrong, as if it had forgotten how human voices were meant to work. Tessa turned to Miles. "Tell me that's the wind." But he couldn't. The sound had hooked itself into him. Something instinctual. He swallowed. "We should camp before dusk hits fully," he said, hating the tremor in his voice. Owen nodded slowly, though his gaze stayed fixed on the direction of the sound. "Aye, that's going fast." They pitched their small camp in a clearing slightly off the trail. A ring of blackened stones marked where others had camped before, but the place felt abandoned, as if years had passed since the last fire burned there. The shadows among the trees thickened too quickly, swallowing the forest floor in uneven patches. Every now and then, Miles thought he saw movement between their trunks. Just a flicker, gone too fast to focus on. As the darkness deepened, the three of them sat close to the fire. No one spoke at first. The flames cracked and spit, the only sound in miles of quiet. Then Owen broke the silence. "How many of us were supposed to come again?" The question was so casual that for a moment Miles didn't understand it. It seemed like a silly question. But something cold started to bloom in his stomach, deep down. "3?" Tessa said sharply. "There are 3 of us?" Owen hesitated. His brow creased. "Yeah, right, sorry." He shook his head as if clearing fog. Must have misremembered. Miles stared at him. Misremembered what? Owen didn't answer. And somewhere just beyond the halo of firelight, the same stretched, almost human sound drifted through the trees again, closer this time. The night pressed in around them, and none of them, not even Miles, could shake the growing sense that the trail had quietly, deliberately swallowed something they all should have remembered. The fire crackled hard enough to throw sparks, but the warmth didn't seem to reach any of them. Owen stared into the flames, jaw working as if chewing on a thought he couldn't quite swallow. Tessa watched him with open concern, whilst Miles just listened to the woods. That was the worst part, the listening. Every few minutes a faint crack or shuffle came from the trees, soft enough that he couldn't be sure if it was his imagination or not, but constant enough that it twisted his nerves tighter each time. Finally, Tessa cleared her throat. Misremembered what, Owen? You're not making any sense. He didn't look up. Nothing, it's not important. Just... never mind. Come on, man. What did you misremember? It's gotta be important if it's bugging you this much. Owen finally raised his head, eyes reflecting the firelight like a pair of coins. I thought someone else was walking with us when we came down that last stretch. Miles's pulse ticked faster. The trail earlier had echoed oddly. The mountains were full of strange acoustics, but he distinctly remembered the feeling of footsteps behind him. Lighter ones, as if someone had been trailing just out of sight. But no, he'd seen nobody. He would have noticed. Tessa forced out a laugh, brittle. You scared me for a second. Sorry. Owen rubbed the back of his neck. Long hike, jet lag, brains jelly. The wind picked up again, only for a breath, and this time Miles caught something out. A faint voice. A half-formed hello. He stiffened, every muscle locking. Tessa saw his expression. What? Did you hear? A twig snapped behind them, sharp as a bone breaking. All three whipped toward the tree line. The firelight only reached so far. Beyond it lay nothing but a wall of blackness, like ink pooled between the trunks. Miles's heart hammered painfully in his chest. Probably a deer, Owen whispered, though even he sounded unconvinced by that. Miles strained his eyes into the dark, feeling the old childhood sense of being watched, an invisible presence just outside the edge of light, patient and deliberate. Then he realized something else. He couldn't see the trail anymore. He knew they hadn't set camp that far off of it, but the path that should have been a pale strip between the trees just wasn't there. As if the forest had quietly shifted in the dark, as if something had moved whilst they weren't looking. We didn't wander, Miles muttered. We didn't move the tents. So why can't we see the trail? Owen frowned and stood brushing dirt off of his hands. Let's take a look. He held up his phone flashlight and stepped toward where the trail should have been. The beam cut through the dark, thin, weak, swallowed too quickly by the trees. Miles followed. Not even 10 paces from the camp, Owen slowed to a halt. That's not right, he breathed. The flashlights showed nothing but unbroken forest floor. No packed dirt, no clear line, no familiar bend of the path. Nothing. It was as if the earth had folded over the trail or erased it entirely. Tessa's voice trembled from behind them. How do we get back if the trail just disappears? Owen didn't answer, and Miles didn't either. Because there, just behind Tessa, far too close, came a soft shuffle. A footstep. Miles spun around, but all he saw was Tessa, pale and shaking. She stepped back toward the fire, keeping it between her and the trees. "Let's stay in the light," she whispered. Owen nodded, slow and uneasy. "Aye, till morning. I'm creaked out." They sat shoulder to shoulder around the fire again, the shadows pulsing at the edge of the forest. The fire popped. The night breathed. Then, from somewhere just out of sight, a whisper. A lot clearer this time. "Miles." He swallowed hard, sickly cold spreading down his spine. Tessa grabbed his arm. "It said your name?" Owen leaned forward, gaze sharp. "No, it didn't." Miles stared at him. "Yeah, it did. You heard it." Owen blinked slowly. "No," he repeated, too calm. "There are only 3 of us out here. We stick together. We'll be fine." Miles stared. The words weren't wrong, but the way Owen said them, flat, rehearsed, like he wasn't repeating what he believed but something he'd been told. A knot tightened in Miles' stomach. The whisper came again, this time from the opposite side of the clearing. "Miles." Tessa's grip tightened painfully, and suddenly Miles wasn't entirely sure who had been hiking beside them all day, or how many footsteps he'd actually heard on the trail, or whether whatever was watching them from the dark was outside of their circle, or already sitting within it. For a while none of them spoke. The fire dimmed down to a low orange pulse, casting long, uneasy shadows across their faces. Miles forced himself to listen, to every snap of bark, every sigh of the wind, every shifting leaf. The whispers had stopped, but the silence felt heavier now, like the woods were just one breath away from falling on them. And then, a soft, measured rustle. All 3 of them stiffened. Tessa whispered, "There's something moving." Miles squinted toward the tree line. Something pale shifted just beyond the circle of light. Slender legs, delicate hooves, stepping carefully between old roots. A deer emerged. Its coat gleamed dully in the firelight, but its shape didn't seem quite right. The legs were too long, the joints bent at slightly wrong angles, like the creature had studied how a deer should move and gotten most of the details correct. But not all of them. Owen sucked in a breath. "Bloody hell, that's close." The deer stared at them, utterly still. Its eyes didn't reflect the fire. They were flat, matte, like polished stone. Miles whispered, "Why is it not running?" Deer didn't look at people that way. Not with that type of interest. Not with intent. This one watched them as if it was waiting for permission to come closer. Tessa shifted nervously. "Maybe it's used to hikers?" "No," Miles murmured. "That's not right." Then the deer took a step, and something inside its stance flickered. Its head twitched too sharply. Its ears jerked in 2 directions at once, and for the briefest moment, so fast Miles wasn't even sure he truly saw it, the entire shape seemed to ripple like heat over hot asphalt. He stood abruptly. "Back up! It's not a deer." The creature froze. Owen rose more slowly, face tightening. "What do you see?" "Look at its neck," Miles whispered. "It's too long. And look at its chest. It's just not breathing." Tessa stared, her face drained of color. "Oh God, it's not!" Before any of them could step away, the deer's head snapped toward the dark, an impossible, boneless turn, and in an instant it bounded into the trees. The sound it made as it ran wasn't the thudding heap of hooves. It was the frantic scrabbling of different digits, almost sounding like a spider. Tessa clamped a hand over her mouth. "Okay," Miles said through shaking breath. That wasn't... A howl cut him off. Low, wet, warbling, even more wrong. Now a coyote stepped into view, from the same direction the deer had fled. Thin, grey, ribs showing through tight skin. Its tail hung limp and unmoving. It took a halting step forward, its paws dragging strangely, as if unsure how far they should lift off the ground. Owen whispered, "I've seen coyotes and they don't just walk up to people." The coyote tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, its mouth yawning open in a grin too wide for its snout. Its tongue lolled out, limp and motionless. "It's the same thing," Miles breathed. Before they could adequately respond to this strange threat, the coyote's body spasmed. Its limbs jerked in different directions, like the creature wasn't fully in control of how to use them. For a moment, its front legs locked straight, and its back twisted violently, as if two shapes were fighting inside, unsure which form to keep. Tessa screamed. The thing snapped its head toward her, too fast and too sharp, and Miles saw its eyes. Not the normal amber of a coyote, not even an animal's eyes. A flat, wrong, white sclered eye, like a human. "Owen," Miles whispered. "It's mimicking. It's trying on different shapes." And that changed everything. Owen's face hardened. "Torch it." Miles grabbed a burning branch from the fire, sparks flying as he lifted it. The creature recoiled immediately, stumbling backward on two long limbs that didn't seem to agree with each other. He advanced with the torch. "Get back," he said, not sure if he was talking to the creature or himself. The coyote shuddered, its skin rippling like something underneath was shifting positions. Its jowls twitched. Its bone structure warped too visibly, like wax held too close to a flame. Miles raised the torch higher. "Go!" The creature let out a sound then. It wasn't the bark or yip or even a snarl of what you'd expect, but a broken, stretched, almost human voice. "Wait." The coyote jerked again, its shape collapsing in on itself. Its hind leg snapped backwards into the wrong angle, its spine flattening for an instant before bulging upwards, its face blurred, the muzzle shortening, teeth clicking violently against each other, as if deciding which set they should belong to. And then, just like the deer, with a spasming leap, the thing darted into the dark and vanished. Owen exhaled shakily. Jesus Christ, what was that?" Tessa clung to herself, trembling. "It knew we saw through it. It ran because we knew." Miles stared into the blackness where the creature disappeared. "No," he said, breath shaking. "It ran because it wasn't ready yet." Tessa looked at him through wide, wet eyes. "Ready for what?" Miles swallowed. "To be something else." They didn't sleep. None of them dared to, none after the deer, and the thing wearing a coyote's face. The fire burned low, then lower still, until only embers remained. The woods never fully fell silent. Every so often, something shifted just beyond the reach of the dying glow, pressing twigs under unseen weight, and always drifting just faintly on the cold breath of early morning. Miles. Tessa flinched every time. Owen stopped reacting after the first hour, though Miles wasn't sure if it was bravery or shock. When finally the first smear of dawn broke over the ridgeline, it felt like a lifeline. They stamped out the embers and shouldered their packs with trembling hands. "We find a road," Owen said, his voice cracked mid-sentence. "Straight as we can manage." Miles nodded. Tessa pulled her hood up as if a thin layer of fabric could keep the forest from seeing her. The woods in early morning were silver and cold, but no less oppressive. Mist clung low around their shins as they pushed through underbrush. Every step was heavier than the last. None of them had slept, and exhaustion made the world swim in and out of focus. Miles led, mostly because neither Tessa nor Owen seemed willing to walk in front of him. After an hour of trudging, the calling began again. This time, somehow closer. Miles stumbled. "Why me?" he muttered, voice cracking. "Why does it keep saying my name?" Tessa jogged to his side. "Why not ours? Why not call for me or for Owen?" Her eyes were wild from sleeplessness. "If it wants us, if it wants all of us, why only you?" "I don't know," Miles said, and he didn't. But the question carved something cold into the space behind his ribs. Owen forced a laugh, but it was empty and breathless. "Maybe you taste better, like a posh wine pairing." "Owen," Tessa snapped. "Not funny." Owen shut his mouth. They walked and walked and walked. The light never seemed to change. Either the sun was refusing to rise any higher, or the trees were getting thicker, stealing more of the morning. Miles. Sometimes the voice came from behind them, sometimes from ahead. Once, terrifyingly, from above. They didn't talk much. Words felt like they cost too much energy. And eventually they reached a part of the forest where the trees grew impossibly dense. Ancient trunks pressed so tight together that only a sliver of light pierced between them. Tessa stared at it warily. "We have to pass through," Miles said. "Straight line to the road," Owen agreed. They entered the thicket. Branches scraped their arms, leaves brushed their faces. The world narrowed into a tunnel of bark and shadow. Miles could barely see Owen's shoulders ahead of him. Tessa just a blur behind him. "Don't lose sight," Miles began. A branch snapped back and clapped his cheek. He ducked, pushing forward, but when he cleared the cluster of trunks and stepped into the open, he found Owen standing there. And another Owen standing beside him. Miles froze. Tessa stumbled out behind him, breath hitching, and made a strangled noise in her throat. Two Owens, same clothes, same pack, same wide, exhausted eyes. One looked terrified, the other looked patient. "Miles?" the Owen on the left whispered. "Is that you?" The Owen to the right swallowed hard. "Something's wrong. Don't get close to it." Tessa backed up until her heels hit a root. 12 seconds, she whispered. "We lost sight of each other for 12 seconds, that's all it takes." The left Owen stepped forward, voice trembling. "It followed us. It came between us and the trees, but I'm me. Don't listen," said the right Owen, shaking his head violently. "You know how it works. It waits, it watches, and then..." The left Owen cut him off, desperate. "Miles, please, you have to look at me. You know me." Miles felt his chest constrict painfully. Both Owens stared at him, both terrified, both pleading. "Miles," they said in unison. Same voice, same cadence, same fear. Behind them, somewhere deeper in the woods. This time it didn't sound neutral. It sounded like it was smiling. Trapped between the two versions of Owen, two identical faces, two identical voices, two sets of pleading eyes. "Miles, please, look at me. You know me." That phrase hit him like a physical blow. "You know me." But he didn't. Not really. They'd barely met 48 hours ago. Hadn't they? Backpacking Brits passing through town, asking directions in a parking lot. They'd started chatting, they'd hit it off. Then he asked if he wanted to join them. Right? Miles tried to summon the exact moment he'd met them. Really met them. A headache bloomed behind his eyes, sharp and nauseating, like something squeezing his skull with cold fingers. He dug harder. A grocery store lot. A too bright sky. 2 friendly strangers. But as he was pressing into the memory, it blurred. Colors washed out, shapes smudged. The edges blend together like ink in water. Beneath it, faint and disturbing, it said something else. Another image, partially erased, a canvas scraped but not fully clean. He tried to push past the fake memory and pain lanced through his temples. He staggered. The 2 Owens stepping forward, both reacting. "Miles?" they both said together. He raised his hand, backing up. Don't touch me!" Tessa moved behind him, footsteps soft and hesitant. Miles turned, expecting her wide, frightened face. Instead, another Owen stared back at him. Same scruffy hair, same jacket, same pack, same drawn, exhausted expression. 3 Owens. "Miles?" one said. "Miles?" echoed the second. "Miles," whispered the third, voice slipping, glitching slightly at the edges. His breath caught in his throat. All 3 stood there, breathing in tandem. That's when it hit him. Not like revelation, but like a curtain falling away. He hadn't met them at a parking lot. He hadn't met anyone. He remembered arriving at the trailhead alone, kicking shut the car door, tightening the straps of his backpack, staring up at the Appalachians and telling himself the solitude would be good for him. Camping alone. Hiking alone. Just him and the trees. And then he remembered something else. A missing poster. 2 hikers. From the United Kingdom. Everything after that. Meeting the Brits, the jokes, the fire, the trail chatter felt wrong now, like someone had traced over an old photograph with thick, uneven pencil strokes. Art layered over, styles clashing, the lines beneath barely visible but undeniably there. He never met these people. Not really. His mind had been rearranged. Miles staggered back until his shoulders hit a tree. "You're not real," he whispered, his voice cracked. "None of you are real." The 3 Owens stared at him with matching expressions, concern, confusion, and something else simmering underneath. Something hungry. "Miles, we're right here," said the second. "You're tired," said the third, his voice warping ever so slightly, like someone running out of breath before finishing a sentence. Miles shook his head, trembling. "Stay away from me!" The 3 Owens blinked in perfect unison. Then they began to ripple. Their shapes wavered like reflections in disturbed water. Their outlines quavered. Features blurred, eyes smeared into dark patches, mouths stretching, hair melting into shadowed shapes. All 3 bodies distorted at once, like flesh struggling to decide which form to hold. They whispered together, voices overlapping, glitching. Behind their half-formed faces, Miles saw it clearly at last. Not a person, not people, not even copies. Just one thing wearing borrowed skins. The illusion peeled away like wet paint sliding off of glass. Miles choked on a cry and stumbled back into the dark of the forest. As the creature's 3 forms rippled again, merging and unmerging, hunting for the shape they wanted next. Miles didn't remember running. He didn't remember falling. He didn't remember the moment he stopped hearing his own heartbeat in his ears and started hearing nothing at all. Not the forest, not the creature, not even his own ragged breaths. He remembered the rippling. He remembered the three Owens collapsing inward, folding into themselves like wet canvas, shaking over a too-hot flame. He remembered screaming once, maybe twice, and then blankness. A thick black smear across his memory. When awareness returned, he was lying face down in mud. Sunlight burned through his eyelids. Real sunlight. Full daylight, not the sickly, filtered stuff that struggled through the Appalachian's canopy. His lips were cracked, his tongue felt like stone. He pushed himself upright, shaking violently. His knees buckled. He hit the ground again. The forest around him was different. No ancient oaks, no labyrinth of tightly packed trunks. These trees were younger, thinner, further apart. The ground was flatter. There were sounds. Crickets, birds, wind, sounds he hadn't realized he'd been missing until now. And then he saw a road, a paved, familiar, utterly beautiful strip of grey cutting through the green. He stumbled toward it on raw, blistered feet, tears burning his vision. When he reached the shoulder, his legs gave out. He collapsed, palms scraping on the gravel. He lay there, chest heaving, staring up at the sky that looked impossibly bright. A car slowed, then stopped. Doors opened. Voices, regal voices, shouted.
Hey, sir, are you all right? Jesus Christ.
Hands rolled him onto his back. Someone recoiled. Another voice, firmer. Call it in, now. Sirens came later. Shapes hovered over him, blurred silhouettes with radios crackling to life. Miles, he rasped without meaning to. Then louder. Miles, my name's Miles. They told him later he'd been found nearly 100 miles from where his car was parked. He'd been missing for 6 days. Search teams had combed the area he'd vanished from, but no one had expected him to appear this far north. No one could explain it. Neither could Miles. He remembered walking into the forest, the creatures whispering to him in a voice that wasn't a voice. He remembered 3 Owens and Tessa turning into someone else. But then nothing. Just a fracture in his memory wide enough to swallow days. The doctors kept him 3 weeks. They labeled it severe dehydration, acute stress response, exposure-induced delirium, and trauma-induced hallucinations. And the words were clean, clinical, meant to soothe. They didn't match the memories he still had, too vivid and sharp. Not hallucinations. No hallucination could mimic a human down to the breath. No hallucination could rewrite a memory so thoroughly that it felt painted on top of him. He survived. Barely. But survival didn't feel like a victory. He couldn't walk near wooded areas anymore. Couldn't fall asleep without hearing a long, broken voice calling his name from the tree line. Couldn't trust the shape of strangers in a crowd. One wrong angle, one strange tilt of the head, and panic would claw up at his throat. Therapists told him flashbacks fade. He didn't believe them. Because sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the wind brushed against the siding, he swore he heard it again. Soft. Wrong. So very patient. Miles. And every time he heard it, something inside him understood. The creature hadn't failed to catch him. It had simply let him go. At least for now. The Scalp of Rabbit Wolf by Bandon CP. Of the early days of the world, after our ancestors crossed the Bering Strait, and millennia before any of the tribes we know of today existed, very little is actually remembered. Sure, there are tales of the beginning of man, and of the earth, but those are only fables, legends told to explain what was then unexplainable. This, however, is not a fable, but a story. A story probably distorted by time, but at its core, true nonetheless. It is in these murky depths of history that the story begins, more than 10,000 years ago. It was in a large depression west of the Appalachians, in what is now known as Middle Tennessee, that the tribe of Appalachia resided. At one time, the leader of a great alliance of tribes, their expansive influence had long since been shattered, and they were now nothing but mere ghosts of their former selves. For generations, they had been oppressed by the surrounding larger tribes, forced by threat of annihilation to make frequent payments to them, and were in desperate need of a warrior who could lead them back into their former glory. Rabbit Wolf was known far and wide as an exceptional warrior of one of those outlying tribes. He himself was something of a living legend at the time, seen almost as a living demon. It was said of him that his eyes blazed with black flames, that he drank blood for water, and that as a child he carved his own heart out with a knife, leaving a grisly hole in its space. Needless to say, Rabbit Wolf was a fearsome warrior with little regard for any ethics or morality. As such, he one day found himself in an argument with the chief's son, which ended with the death of the son, and, consequently, Rabbit Wolf being banished from the tribe. He tried to go to the other tribes, but none would have him. Save Appalachia. Upon being accepted into his new home, an idea occurred to him. One that would not only benefit him, but also the people of the tribe. The Appalachia, though heavily oppressed, were plentiful in numbers, and Rabbit Wolf thought that with the right kind of leadership, it would be possible for them to reclaim their old powers from years before, and if he were to be the one to do it, then he could also enact his revenge upon his former tribe. His plan was not without risk, however, and Rabbit Wolf knew this, and perhaps understood it better than anyone. The lands of the Appalachia were surrounded by less than friendly tribes, who were united in their oppression of the Appalachia, and could easily squash them like maggots if they so pleased. So, he made a proposal to the chief, who knew well of Rabbit Wolf's skills in battle. Let him conduct a series of mock wars within the tribe, with the chief leading one side and Rabbit Wolf leading the other. If Rabbit Wolf should win 10 out of 13 of these mock wars, and each time convince the captured warriors to willingly fight for him, then Rabbit Wolf should be allowed to lead the Appalachia into war, to claim the territories of the surrounding tribes in real war. The chief agreed, and not only did Rabbit Wolf win all of the mock wars, but each time only the chief was left standing against Rabbit Wolf's men, as all of the others had been successfully convinced to join his ranks. Having passed with flying colors, Rabbit Wolf immediately became the second in command, and, after many months of preparation, led the tribe's warriors out to reclaim the honor that had been stolen from them decades before. Once they set out, they began to gain their former territory very quickly. Despite the lack in numbers of the Appalachia warriors in comparison to their enemies, under Rabbit Wolf's leadership, they soon became unstoppable in numbers and skill. Within 5 years, it is said, the Appalachia Empire stretched all the way from the Appalachian Mountains of the east to the Rocky Mountains of the west, with nothing in between free from their rule. Village after village burned, tribe after tribe was taken, and person after person was killed. Rabbit Wolf himself is said to have slain over 3,000 men, women, and children. and to have assaulted even more women and girls. Yet, despite this, people flocked to his army like gnats to a light, for it seemed that very few were immune from the powers of his persuasion. That is not to say, though, that there weren't those who deeply despised the Utlavgittel and their precious rabbit wolf. No, it would have been impossible for them to not have many bitter enemies, and many bitter enemies they had, chief amongst them the Arklak from the north. The Arklak were a large tribe along the coast of what is now known as Hudson Bay, and they had been recently advanced upon by Rabbit Wolf's army. Initially only angered by their advancements, they were soon further enraged when they began to hear tales of Rabbit Wolf's vileness. Rabbit Wolf too was becoming more and more agitated as time went on. For though they were a small-statured people, the Arklak were some of the fiercest fighters of the time, and as such, the Utlavgittel, no matter how hard they tried, could not manage to defeat them. To their advantage, though, they remained elusive, constantly on the move so that the Arklak could never find out where their main camp was. Nevertheless, in spite of their best efforts, a band of Arklak scouts did one day spot Rabbit Wolf's camp along the Hudson River. Knowing that they had little time to act before this camp would move again, the scouts hurried back to the chief, who promptly sent 3 of his stealthiest warriors to sneak into the camp and assassinate Rabbit Wolf in his sleep. And so, veiled by the darkness of night, the assassins snuck into Rabbit Wolf's tent and strangled him with a rope. To prove to their chief that they had indeed killed the villain, they took a large strip of his scalp and left the camp. The chief was pleased, and without the military genius of Rabbit Wolf, the empire of the Utlavgittel soon began to fall, and things, for the most part, returned to how they were before the rise of that tribe. Rabbit Wolf's body was brought duly back to his birthplace in present-day Tennessee, where he was able to be ceremoniously buried. To make sure that he didn't completely decay on the way back, his body was preserved, though it was poorly done at that. When the body was finally brought back home, the village's medicine men saw that a piece of Rabbit Wolf's scalp had been taken. Being a devout supporter of him, and knowing that only the Arklak could be the ones responsible, he performed a very complicated and very dangerous spell, so that as long as any part of Rabbit Wolf's body remained in existence, his spirit would live within that piece. According to the legend, soon after this was done, the Arklak were hit by a mysterious plague that caused a fatal inflammation of the throat. In his pride and on his deathbed, the chief of Arklak ordered the scalp to be expertly preserved, sealed in a great willow tree that stood in the center of their village. Soon he could not bear the thought of his greatest trophy ever being lost. Never did any of the Arklak know the curse that was placed upon it. There the scalp of Rabbit Wolf remained for many centuries, until almost none of the tribes of Rabbit Wolf's day existed, and his empire was no more than a myth. That is, until one sweltering summer afternoon, a small boy of the Ivig tribe came across the tree that contained the scalp of Rabbit Wolf. The once magnificent tree that stood in the middle of the Arklak village all those centuries ago was now dead and decrepit. The sealant, now chipped away in a spot, was what had caught the boy's eye. Upon closer inspection, he saw that the sealant in fact covered a hollow in the trunk, and so the boy picked at the small hole until he could put his arm in and feel for whatever was inside. After a moment, he felt what seemed to be human hair. Driven by his growing curiosity, he picked away at the hole until he could finally bring out the scalp. Immediately upon pulling it out of the tree, the boy felt an awesome power flowing through his body from the scalp. Exhilarated by this incredible find, the little boy, whose name was Soaring Tree, raced home to show his grandmother. However, his grandmother, who had grown up hearing the tale of Rabbit Wolf's scalp, knew instantly what it was, and immediately took it to the tribe's shaman, who attempted to destroy it, but failed. Both the shaman and Soaring Tree's grandmother were found soon afterwards, mysteriously killed. Soaring Tree, who was close to both his grandmother and the shaman, felt a strange lack of remorse for his sudden loss, which was very uncharacteristic of him, as he was usually a sensitive and caring person. Later, when everybody was asleep, he snuck into the shaman's tent and retrieved the perfectly intact scalp. Over the next several weeks, his conscience grew heavier as guilt built up within him about the lack of grief. Seeing an opportunity, the spirit of Rabbit Wolf used this vulnerability to gain a stronger foothold on Soaring Tree, so that the dead warrior's spirit could slowly devour that of the child's, with the goal that eventually Soaring Tree would be nothing more than a shell for Rabbit Wolf, who would then live through the child's flesh in addition to his scalp and distantly buried bones. Over the years, Soaring Tree grew into a warrior, the greatest of his people, and all of the surrounding tribes grew to fear the Ivig because of him. And though he was young in age, his leadership was exceptional, for as he approached manhood, very little of his original spirit remained, so that in character and expertise, he was nearly identical to Rabbit Wolf, though he did not consciously know it. Then there once came a morning when Soaring Tree came into conflict with the chief of his tribe. After several heated words, they engaged in a traditional unarmed battle to the death for the position of chief, as was Ivig custom, with the chief trying to keep it, and Soaring Tree fighting to take it. With the spirit of Rabbit Wolf to guide him, in addition to his own natural fighting ability, Soaring Tree ultimately killed his opponent, and became the successive chief of the formidable Ivig tribe. After this point, the story of Soaring Tree becomes much the same as Rabbit Wolf's from centuries before. He killed and assaulted by the thousands, and, in addition to that, he also regained every last inch of the ancient Utlatgitl Empire, with new lands to add. It is no secret that name holds power, and that this was no less true back then as it is today, and in Soaring Tree's time, his name was probably the most powerful one in North America. For some, the name of Soaring Tree was something to fear. For others, it was something to hate. But because of Rabbit Wolf's skill in speech and persuasion, for most it was a symbol of hope, a great beacon of light to stand behind until the very end. And though it seemed that Soaring Tree's greatness would never end, his greatness, as all things eventually do, one day did come to an end. Soaring Tree was old, and though he hid it well, he was dying, and he knew it. He was on the Colorado Plateau, headed south, when he died painfully and alone in the night. His body was brought back to his home in the north, where he was buried as a warrior, along with the scalp of Rabbit Wolf, though none knew of its significance. The people mourned, and Soaring Tree's successor, though not nearly as good as Rabbit Wolf or Soaring Tree, was better than the successor of Rabbit Wolf insomuch as the Ivig Empire did not crumble away immediately. However, while it did not lose any territory, no new lands were gained either. The Ivig Empire simply remained in a state of expansive stagnancy. About 100 years after Soaring Tree's death, the Empire's leader, Falling Stone, desperately wished to expand the already expansive empire further south. However, despite his best efforts, Falling Stone could not do this. At least, not on his own. All knew of Soaring Tree's greatness, yet few knew why he had been such a phenomenal warrior and leader. Nonetheless, as it is with many things, the truth, though diluted and distorted, lived on the shapes of rumors and legends that few took seriously. Falling Stone had grown up hearing these tales, but he'd never taken very much stock in them. But as time wore on, Falling Stone couldn't help but wonder if perhaps there wasn't some truth to these stories after all. knowing that he'd be ridiculed if he went chasing after it. Falling Stone initially refused to go searching for the fabled scalp. But failure persisted, and out of desperation Falling Stone finally gave in and headed north to find Soaring Tree's grave. There he found not only the rancid bones of Soaring Tree, but also the legendary scalp of Rabid Wolf. And just like Soaring Tree had more than a century before, Falling Stone felt a tremendous power surging through his body the moment he laid hands upon the old scalp. Delighted with his new invigorating powers and visions of conquest, Falling Stone hurried back down south and shared his secret with none, save the awakened beast that hung from his hip. As with Soaring Tree, Rabid Wolf's spirit tried to devour that of Falling Stone, but found that success would be difficult. Soaring Tree's spirit had been young and vulnerable when it had come into contact with the cursed scalp, and encountered Rabid Wolf's demented hungry spirit, making it easy prey. However, Falling Stone was old, grizzled, and war-hardened, and so was his spirit, and because of this, the two were constantly battling for supremacy over Falling Stone. It is said that a house divided cannot stand, and such was the case for Falling Stone, though Falling Stone did not know it, as the unconscious battle within him waged. His leadership in real battle declined. The old emperor was finding the push southward increasingly more difficult, and eventually found that the Ivig push was now being pushed backwards. Around the time that they had been pushed back to where they had started in the first place, news reached the emperor of rebellions erupting all over the empire. And though he tried as hard as he could, Falling Stone could not keep his great empire from trickling out of his old grizzled clutches, for that battle inside still raged on. Then, at the solemn end, the Ivig Empire collapsed completely, and so too did Falling Stone. As far as the different versions of the story go, some say that the scalp was buried along with Falling Stone, while others say that somebody who knew it for what it truly was took it and kept it hidden away somewhere safe. Some even say that the scalp was handed down through the ages as an adopted family heirloom. But no matter the ending, each version of the story is very consistent in one thing: that the scalp of Rabid Wolf still exists to this day. And now I know the truth. For my grandfather has just very recently passed away, and before he died he handed me an Indian scalp as a rite of passage as I leave behind my childhood and travel forth into manhood. My grandfather said that I must keep it locked away, somewhere safe and hidden. But I am no fool. This scalp is too valuable a resource to just leave locked away. No. I will be the first to finally control it, and I will go down as one of the greatest men in history. How will I control it, might you ask? Easy. I have history to teach me. Soaring Tree was too weak to coexist with the scalp, and Falling Stone was too ignorant to know that the scalp would try to consume him. But I am not weak, nor am I ignorant. I will coexist successfully with Rabid Wolf, and together we will conquer the world. I Found a Dark and Lonely Road by Shadow Swimmer 77. I try to live my life without too many regrets. I've had highs and lows like everyone else, sure, but I do what I can not to worry too much about what could have happened if I made a different choice, if I maybe hadn't taken the road less traveled. I figure everyone makes the best decisions they can with the information they have available at the time. Going through all the what-ifs is ridiculous, because the only way you could have made another choice is if you've had some other details, which of course you didn't. Hindsight is perfect, and even then, You can never be sure exactly what the sequence of events might have looked like if you'd gone right instead of left. And yet, there is one choice I made, one road I took. I just can't help but wonder how things might have turned out if I'd only done something different. My job has me move around pretty regularly. I'm not going to get into what I do. It has no bearing on the story. But a couple of years ago, I was working in Philadelphia and living on the other side of the Delaware River in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'm originally from northwestern Pennsylvania, and since this is the closest I've been to home since I moved out of college, I took the chance to see my parents whenever I could. I knew I'd be moving in again before long, and my folks aren't getting any younger. So I tried to find a weekend every month or so to make the 7-hour-long trip to visit them. If I'd been thinking about it when I was looking for places to rent, I'd have probably tried to live on the west side of Philadelphia instead of Jersey to avoid the traffic hour. But by the time I realized it, the lease was signed and there wasn't much I could do. The drive to my hometown was pretty boring, honestly. I'd take the Ben Franklin Bridge across the river, head up the I-476 for an hour or so, then a long slog across basically the entire expanse of the PA on I-80, before another hour north on I-79 to Erie, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. The only variance in the drive was how long it would take me to get through Philly, because once I got on the 476 extension, I could typically predict my ETA within 5 or 10 minutes. My second summer in Jersey, I'd taken 2 weeks off and planned on spending the second week in Erie. Things changed that first Wednesday, though, because a big storm blew through and knocked out power in a good part of the area where I was living. Dealing with 90-degree heat with no air conditioning wasn't something I particularly felt like spending the first half of my vacation doing. So, after one uncomfortably sweaty night, I let my parents know I'd be heading over in a few days. In retrospect, I should have left first thing in the morning. But, because I had a couple things to take care of before heading out, by the time I finally got on the road that Thursday, it was past lunchtime and getting on towards mid-afternoon. For whatever reason, the traffic in Philly was particularly heavy, and by the time I finally got through town, I was a good hour behind schedule. Still, based on my normal timeline, I'd figure I'd still be able to make it early enough to grab some dinner and beer with my dad before crashing in for the night. Two things I hadn't taken into consideration were the number of other folks that apparently had the same idea to get out of town at that time, and the road construction that must have sprung up in the time since my last trip home. The interstate highway system is a heck of a thing. Being able to zip along at 65, 70, or in some remote places like West Texas even faster than that makes cross-country automobile travel take a fraction of the hours it would otherwise. I can tell you the numbers of times my folks reminisced about the days before the interstate, when going to see friends outside of D.C. would take twice as long as it does now. What's truly remarkable to me, though, is that even though the entire system of highways was built start to finish in a mere 35 years, it sure seems like when parts of it go under construction, they stay that way forever. Traffic was uncharacteristically heavy, but moving, and I was making decent time, until I saw the first orange warning signs letting me know that our 4 lanes were reducing to 3, and then 2, and then 1. Hundreds of cones stretched down the road as far as the eye could see. And see I certainly could as the cars in front of me reached a complete and total standstill. It was one of the worst deadlocks I'd ever been in. Seriously, I think I moved a mile in an hour. After about 3 hours, my stomach started grumbling. With an exit just up ahead, and no end of the traffic jam in sight, I got off and found a diner to grab some dinner. Even if traffic miraculously picked up, I still had a solid 5 hours of driving ahead of me. So at that point, I knew for sure it was going to be pretty late that I was getting in. After finishing eating, I got back on the road. Things looked like they were picking up for a couple of miles, but then I came up to the back end of the jam and was right back to waiting. We were moving a little bit better. I think average about 5 miles an hour at this point. But as the sun started edging towards the horizon, I pulled out my phone and started to see if Google Maps could clue me in on any kind of workaround. It's a funny thing about human nature. Most of us don't like to sit still. Studies at airports showed that people would rather walk farther to claim their baggage, even if the total time would have been less if they had a slightly longer wait in the plane side. Well, the power of the internet appeared to be in my favor. Though I-80 still showed as a dark red band for another 50 miles or so, there was a southbound country road coming up in a few miles, and a northbound one a couple miles after that, either of which looked like they'd let me bypass the worst of the traffic. Since I'd spent the better part of the day sitting on the road, my patience was worn out, and I opted to take the southbound road even though the app told me it was ultimately 30 minutes longer than I'd get to my parents' house. I just wanted to get moving again, and reasoned at this rate it might take me more than a 30-minute difference to get to the northbound route anyway. And that is a choice that will haunt me until the day I die. I made the turnoff and immediately felt my mood improve. The signs alternated limiting my speed between 35 and 40 miles an hour, but even that seemed like flying compared to the logjam I'd spent the last couple of hours in. The drive was interesting. The road started a little twisty, with plenty of elevation changes as it curved up and around the hills of central Pennsylvania. It took me on a general southwest diagonal, but turned and doubled back on itself enough that for the first 30 minutes or so, I got regular views on the stalled traffic on the I-80. Pretty soon after that, though, just about the time that the sun was just dipping down beneath a couple of hills in my rearview mirror, the road took a long curving track and carried me down and away out of the sight of the interstate. Now, something that a lot of people don't realize is how big of a state Pennsylvania is. Sure, there are plenty of bigger ones, but PA is pretty deceptively big, and it's remote, isolated. Hell, the translation of the name means Penn's Woods, after all. The Blair Witch Project didn't have to embellish that aspect of the state. The fact that you could head into the woods and walk for dozens of miles in any direction without seeing anything like another human being. It's got a decent number of cities. Pittsburgh and Philly both have enough of a population to support major sports teams. But away from those centers of development, the Harrisburgs and Pottsvilles and Scrantons and what have you, there's a whole lot of nothing. Nothing and trees. And dark and lonely roads. Such was the road I was traveling that night, winding through the twists and turns of the Appalachian foothills. I've moved around a lot, I mentioned. Traveled through most of the continental states anyway. Sometimes I used to wonder, when I'd been driving along a patch of asphalt surrounded by only untamed wilderness, what it must have been like to construct such a road. What had it been like before men had intruded with our civilization and our machines? What had lived there? I don't wonder anymore. Not since that night when I went left instead of right. The way continued to twist, back and forth, up and down. As I wound deeper into the foothills, the trees grew thicker, branches from either side of the road reaching over and almost touching, forming a natural canopy 20 feet up that blocked out much of my view of the sky and the stars above. I drove with my high beams on, because the idea of streetlights had never entered the minds of whoever built this road. The painted lines were old and not well cared for, and I found myself gradually straddling the faded double yellow partition running down the middle of the two lanes to keep some distance between myself and the trees that increasingly encroached the pavement's edge. I had never been a particularly good navigator. My parents used to say it was because I spent my childhood with my nose pushed into books during car rides. But I personally just think it's because I'm bad at it. So it was that. Despite there was no possible way I could be lost, there was no other roads that I could have possibly turned onto to get off track, that I more and more frequently found myself checking my phone to ensure that I was still on the right path, which is how I almost ran into the other car. My mind was wandering, thinking about the fact that my signal bars had dropped and remained at 0 for the last 25 minutes, and what possible implications that would mean if I should find myself in some kind of emergency. I raised my eyes back up to the road after Google Maps confirmed for probably the 20th time that I was still on my route, after my brain took a beat to process that what I was rapidly approaching was a vehicle stopped in the middle of the lane, I slammed my foot on the brake. I stopped in time, but not by much, with maybe 5 feet sparing my hood from the other car's rear bumper. My heart was pounding my chest as adrenaline coursed through my body, but my fear quickly gave way to anger. Seriously, what the hell was this guy doing? Not only was he stopped in the middle of the road, but his lights were off. If I hadn't had my high beams on, there was a good chance I wouldn't have been able to see him before practically being on top of him. Even if I hadn't been checking my phone. I could feel my pulse beating in the vein in the side of my neck. I'm not somebody particularly quick to road rage, and after a couple quick breaths, I managed to get a hold of myself. Not wanting to outright alarm anyone that might still be in the vehicle, I shifted into reverse and backed up about 20 feet, popping my hazards on. That's when I started noticing a few odd things about the stopped car. More than just the fact that the lights were out. Of course, it was halted directly in the middle of the road. But that wasn't unreasonable, since there wasn't any shoulder to speak of that the driver could have moved it to. The strange thing, though, was that all the doors were open, those on the driver's side even crossing over slightly into the oncoming lane. And on further observation, I saw an item drop down on the road by the driver's side door. Something that appeared to be a child's stuffed animal. I considered my options, and after a few seconds, I decided that I would have to go against my better judgment to keep on my merry way and head outside to get a better idea of what was going on. I said earlier my job doesn't have anything to do with the story, which is mostly true. But before you judge my decision too harshly, it bears mentioning that I've spent some time in the military. An obligation to help people has been drilled into me since a very early age, and I'd seen enough things whilst deployed to feel I could handle myself. And so I got out of the car and kept it running. I popped the trunk to get the flashlight I kept in there and left my headlights on so that I could see what I was doing. I looked up and down the road, hoping to spy signs of other cars approaching. But no luck. "Hello?" I called to the other car as I cautiously started my approach, circling around to the left towards the middle of the road so I'd be able to get a good look on the inside but not get too close. "Anyone there?" No answer. The beams from my headlights helped some, but there were enough shadows to still obscure the car's interior. Shining my flashlight, though, easily determined that no one was inside. I moved closer, stooping down by the rear door to pick up the fallen object off the road. It was a child's toy, just as I suspected. A stuffed rabbit with well-worn patches showing signs of frequent love. I frowned. If the folks traveling in the car had hitchhiked a ride with a passerby, they would have taken the rabbit, or the kid would have thrown a conniption. I shut the rear door and moved up to the front. I put my hand on the hood and found it was still warm to the touch. That meant that it couldn't have been there for terribly long. I slid into the driver's seat to try and figure out if there was some kind of mechanical issue that would have forced the car to stop, and was startled to find a set of keys still dangling from the ignition. Pressing the brake, I turned the key and the engine started right up. Headlights and the dome light in the roof springing to life. Fuel, oil, temperature, battery. All the gauges looked good. Not even a check engine light. Curiouser and curiouser. Then I saw the purse in the passenger seat. I picked it up, a normal brown shoulder bag, and briefly rummaged around before finding a wallet inside. Everything appeared to be intact. About $40 in cash. A couple credit cards, gym membership, Sam's Club card. The driver's license named the owner as Mary Walker, a pretty blonde that had just turned 30 the month before. A couple pictures showed Mary in staged poses sitting on a blanket under a tree whose leaves were turned red and yellow, captured in the thrall of autumn. A huge bearded lumberjack of a man hugged her from behind, a small ponytail with a goofy over-exaggerated smile on her lap. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a shiver running down the base of my spine. Something was very wrong with this situation. I put everything back in the purse and returned it to the seat, turned off the car and got out, shutting the driver's door behind me. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911, holding it over my head to try and get a connection with no luck. Cursing softly, I jammed the red end call button and moved around to the passenger side of the car. I played my flashlight around and noticed that some of the foliage at the edge of the road was bent and trampled, like someone had walked through it. I didn't have enough woodcraft to be able to judge how long ago they might have passed, but even then, I couldn't imagine any scenario for why they would have gone wandering. Shining my light into the woods, the beam only extended maybe 30 feet through the trees before being effectively swallowed by the greedy blackness. Looking at the flattened foliage, I had the stuffed rabbit in my hand, then at the dark trees crowding maliciously. My thoughts teetered back and forth between what I should do. I made up my mind. I'd been trained to help people. It was hardwired into my system. There was a child somewhere in the woods. I raised my foot to take a step onto the beaten path, and that's when a flicker of movement entered the very edge of my flashlight beam. It was Mary Walker. She was naked and walking stiffly, unnaturally, her arms swaying out of sync with the rest of her body, like a marionette manipulated by an inexperienced puppeteer.
"Hello?"
her voice called out.
"Anyone there?"
More shapes came into view behind her, shambling along. Here the bearded man who must have been Mary's husband. There her little daughter, owner of the well-loved rabbit. Both naked, both moving as oddly as their wife and mother. And now I could tell there were more. Many more. Their forms indistinct out of the direct light, but so many they caused the darkness to pitch and swell with their odd, staggering passage. Their voices a chorus.
"Hello?
They called.
Anyone there?"
Parroting back the questions I'd asked only a few short minutes ago when I approached the abandoned car. I took a stumbling step back, away from the woods and the approaching automatons, tripping onto Walker's car. Catching my balance, I involuntarily shone the light up into the pitch recesses of the branches, and in doing so could just make out, barely, a sort of darkness crouched hidden in the upper limits. A void even darker than the trees. Was it just my imagination? Those lines of pure blackness that extend from the concealed mass and seem to pierce the flesh of Mary Walker and her kin, and the countless other shapes moving in concert with them.
"Hello? Anyone there?"
I sprinted then back to my car, engine mercifully still running, headlights and hazard flashing welcomingly.
"Hello?"
I shifted into reverse, miraculously keeping enough of my head to avoid running off the road as I completed the 3-point turn.
"Anyone there?"
I chanced to look in my rearview mirror. The pale form of Mary Walker stood halted at just the edge of the forest where the trees met the road. One hand was raised, beckoning me to return, or perhaps waving goodbye, her face a mask of confused sadness. I pressed the gas and drove back the way I came. I did not look back again. The rest of the trip was a fog. At some point after I made it back to the interstate, I called my parents, let them know I wouldn't be getting in until late. I drove on autopilot, the traffic jam having cleared whilst I was off. I thought about calling 911, but I didn't. What would I have told them? And to what end? There was no one left to be helped. I try to not go through life with too many regrets, wondering about what-ifs. But this one, this choice. What if I had left earlier in the day? What if I hadn't stopped for dinner? Maybe I would still have gone left. Maybe I would have been there in time to help the walkers. Maybe I would have been taken by that black thing fishing in the dark. What if I had gone right? Would I still be ignorantly going through life and knowing there are other things out there? I try not to think about it too often, but every now and then my thoughts turn to the stuffed rabbit. It wasn't until I reached my parents' house that night that I realized I still had it clutched in my hand. I used to wonder, before men brought our roads and civilization, what was the wilderness like? What lived there? I don't wonder anymore. I can't afford to. At least if I don't want to wake up screaming. And no matter how bad the traffic, I always stick to the interstate.
I've always loved the Appalachians. There's something about the way the mist hangs between the ridge lines in the early morning, how the trees seem to breathe with you when the wind moves through them. People back home think it's weird that I come here alone, that I spend nights miles from the nearest road with nothing but a tent, a headlamp, and the sound of the forest for company. They say these mountains have stories, whispers about things that live deeper in the woods than people were meant to go. I don't really get it. To me, it's peaceful. I come out here to get away from the hum of the highway, the endless glow of street lights. Out here, it's just the earth and air and water, the real stuff, not the imitations we've built around ourselves. One of the coolest facts about this place is that they used to be connected to the Highlands of Scotland. You know, back when Pangea was a thing. They're just that old. I started this hike 3 days ago, following an old trail that doesn't show up on maps anymore. The ranger at the station frowned when I mentioned it, said the path wasn't maintained, that it wasn't recommended. He wouldn't look me in the eye when he said that. I figured he was just being cautious. Too many weekend hikers getting lost because they didn't pack a compass or thought a GPS would work out there. Though I'll admit, today something doesn't feel quite right. I can't quite put my finger on it. The forest looks the same. The endless canopy. The same peaceful quiet, except for the wildlife. Still, I can't help but think it's peaceful. I've always liked coming out here alone. There's a kind of quiet in these mountains that you can't find anywhere else. Not the dead quiet of an empty room, but something alive. Every breeze carries scent of moss and pine. Every sound feels older than memory, which I suppose makes sense when you think about where you are. I know people say this place makes them uneasy, that the silence feels heavy or that the woods have a way of watching you. I've never really felt that. To me, it's perfect. The stillness, the way sunlight filters through the leaves like gold dust, the low hum of insects and distant water babbling. It's the best kind of music. I come out here to remind myself what the world sounds like when it isn't trying to sell me something. Out here, time stretches. You breathe deeper without meaning to. There's a saying that refers to wilderness spots like this that I completely agree with. Out here, you can breathe with both lungs. I passed a few hikers on my way up this morning, and each one gave me that look, the half smile that says, better you than me. Maybe they see something I don't. But standing here, surrounded by green so thick it swallows the horizon, I can't imagine being anywhere else. It was sometime afternoon when I first heard something. The sound of something heavy moving through the trees just off the trail. Not the usual scatter of a squirrel or a lazy shuffle of a raccoon. It seemed to come out of nowhere. A sudden crashing through the trees to my left, fast and heavy, like something tearing downhill at full speed. I froze, obviously, eyes on the undergrowth, waiting for whatever it was to burst out onto the trail. Nothing did. The noise cut off as quickly as it had started.
leaving only the ringing silence of the forest behind it. For a second, my pulse was in my throat. Then I laughed, a short, shaky sound. Probably a deer spooked by me coming up the trail too quietly. Or a bear, maybe. They move faster than you think for something that big. I reached down and brushed my fingers against the can of bear spray clipped to my strap, just to remind myself it was there. Truth is, the bears around here are more scared of people than we are of them. I learned that the hard way a few years back. Came around a boulder on an old service road and nearly ran face first into a black bear the size of 4 football players. For a split second we both froze. Then it made this startled grunt, spun around, and shot straight up a tree like it weighed nothing. I remember standing there laughing, watching it peer down at me from 30 feet up, pretending it hadn't just fled for its life. So I told myself this was the same thing. Just an animal that didn't want to be seen. Though after I thought about it for a little while, I did notice something strange. The sound of the crashing through the woods didn't get fainter. It stayed around the same. It sounded almost like it wasn't running away, but running parallel to me. After the noise had faded and the forest settled again, I decided to push on. My plan was to make it down to the road before sunset. There's an old diner marked on my map about 5 miles east, and I figured a hot meal would be a nice break from trail mix and dehydrated stew. The path down was steep in places, winding through switchbacks lined with ferns and thick rhododendron. It took me close to 4 hours, but it was worth every step. The day had opened up beautifully. Sunlight slanted through the canopy in long, soft columns, turning the air gold where it caught the drifting pollen. The smell of earth and wildflowers mixed with that faint, sweet tang of pine sap warming on the bark. The only sound for miles was that rhythmic scuff of my boots and the chatter of birds. They were everywhere. Warblers darting through the low branches, woodpeckers hammering somewhere deep in the trees, and once, a brilliant blue jay that swooped across the path ahead of me, like a flash of sky coming loose. I stopped a few times just to listen. Out here, even silence has texture. You start to notice how alive it is. At one point, a raven passed overhead, its wings cutting a clean line against the sky. I watched it circle for a moment, coasting on the air like it owned the whole mountain. I'd read somewhere that ravens are among the smartest animals on Earth. They recognize faces, solve problems, even remember people who have been kind to them. There's evidence of them teaming up with predators, calling out to wolves or coyotes to show them where prey is, then sharing in the spoils after the hunt, or using the bigger predator's teeth to cut open a carcass of an animal that's already died, while also having the added benefit of keeping away eagles and other predators that might chase away the raven. I saw this on a documentary on Yellowstone. It was really cool. I've even heard they can mimic human voices, kind of like a parrot, though I've never met one that tried, not in the wild at least. Funny what nature figures out when you're not paying attention. For a while I just got lost in my surroundings. My legs ached, but in that good, clean way that means you've earned your rest. Somewhere ahead, I could hear the road, and eventually I could almost smell the diner. Bacon grease and coffee drifting up the hillside in my imagination. By the time I reached the road, the sun had started to dip behind the ridges, throwing long blue shadows across the pavement. The diner wasn't much to look at, a squat, sun-faded building with a buzzing neon sign that just said "Eats." The smell hit me before I got even closer to the door. The kind of smell that tells you it's probably not the most sanitary, but by God is it delicious. The scent that could make a man forgive any number of his sins. Inside the place was alive in that slow, easy way mountain diners get toward evening. A couple of locals sat at the counter nursing mugs of coffee. A waitress hummed along to a song from the radio. And somewhere in the back a grill hissed like rain. I slid into a booth near the window, ordered a burger and a slice of pie, and just let myself enjoy being around people again. Not long after, a man in a camo jacket and an orange cap took a seat across from me with a nod. He had that weathered, sunburned look of someone who just spends most of his life outdoors. "You out here hunting?" he asked, his voice a gravelly drawl softened by friendliness. I shook my head. "Nah, just hiking. I hunt back home though. Mostly invasive deer though. Trying to help keep the balance, you know." That got a grin out of him. He gave me a solid clap on the back that nearly knocked the air from my lungs. "Well, thank you for your service," he said, half joking, but with that undercurrent of genuine respect. "Those deer will eat those forest bear, we don't keep track of them." I chuckled and asked, "What about you? What do you go after? Deer, hogs, maybe bear?" He snorted and shook his head. "Deer, sure enough. Hogs if they turn up the ground bad enough. Not bear." He leaned back and took a sip from his coffee mug, eyes flicking toward the window as if one might be passing by right then. "Ain't right, eating another predator. Don't make no sense. They got them worms in them that make your brain funny. No thanks. I stick to things with hooves, feathers, or scales. That's enough meat for me." He leaned in close then, a grave seriousness on his face, as he said almost in a whisper, "Oh, and there's one more most important thing about not hunting bear. The best reason." He looked around as if it was a secret that he needed to keep just between me and him. "They're just too damn cute to shoot." We both laughed at that, and I nodded, smiling. Hard to argue with that. We talked for a while longer, about the trails, the fishing up north, and the weather rolling in from the west. It felt good, easy, the kind of conversation you can only have in a place where everyone knows the land, where talk of trees and rivers carries more weight than politics or the price of gas. When my food came, the hunter raised his coffee in a small salute, a universal sign of saying, "Right, I've had enough, I'm going." But before he did, he leaned his elbows on the table and nodded towards my folded map. "So, where are you headed from here?" I spread it out between the ketchup bottle and the napkin holder, tracing a finger along a faint green line that wound back up toward the higher ridge. "Thinking about taking this trail here. Quit through the back country for a couple of days before looping east. I figured I'd make camp near the ridgeline tonight." He squinted at the map, then frowned a little, the deep lines in his face folding in on themselves. "You're talking about the old Elk River path?" I nodded. "That's the one." He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. "Wouldn't do that if I were you. Trail a few miles closer the road will get you to the same place, and you won't be missing much but trouble." That caught my attention. "Trouble?" I asked, half grinning. "Like bad terrain, or—" He looked down at his coffee for a long moment before answering. "Nah, just not right up that way." When I didn't say anything, he sighed and went on. "Hard to explain. Just a feeling you get. Woods are thick up there, real old. Some of the boys I hunt with say they heard things. Voices, screams, laughing, shadows moving where they shouldn't. You know how folks get talking, but still." He paused again, jaw tightening. "Only thing I ever had happen up there myself was one time, late season, I'm tracking sign near one of the old fire roads. Real quiet, middle of the day. Then I hear this little voice behind me. That kid couldn't be more than 6 or 7, asking me how to get home." He gave a short, humorless laugh and rubbed the back of his neck. "Thought maybe family got turned around, so I called out, told him to stay put and started walking that way. But the voice kept moving, always just far enough ahead I couldn't see nothing. After about 50 yards, the woods went dead still. Not even a bird. I turned around, I swear it was like the trail had shifted behind me. Took me half an hour to find my bearings again." The hunter's eyes had gone a little distant, staring past me at something that wasn't there. He gave a small shudder and forced a grin. Anyway, best to stay clear of that ridge. Some places just don't want you hanging around. Stick closer to the road. You'll still get your view, and you'll sleep easier. He pushed his chair back then, dropped a few bills on the table, and clapped me on the shoulder again. Good talking to you, friend. Enjoy your hike. Just, pick your path careful. The bell over the door jingled as he left, the last bit of daylight spilling across the floor before the door swung shut. For a moment I just sat there, listening to the low hum of the diner. The coffee machine hissed. Someone laughed at the counter. Everything felt normal again. Still, when I folded the map up, I found myself tracing the other trail one more time. The one he told me to avoid. I sat there for a long time after the hunter left, stirring what was left of my coffee. His story kept turning over in my head. The part about the kid's voice especially. I'd heard my fair share of campfire tales over the years, and most of them start with someone saying, "I can't explain it." Out here, the woods play tricks. Sound carries weirdly. Echoes bounce around in ways that make you swear someone's walking right beside you. Still, something about the way he'd said it, quiet, matter of fact, stuck with me. I told myself it was just another mountain story. Every range has them. I've been hiking the Appalachians for years, often alone, and never had anything truly strange happen. The worst I ran into was weather that turned faster than expected, or a raccoon bold enough to unzip my food bag in the night. Nothing you couldn't laugh about later. Well, almost nothing. There was one time about 2 summers back, when I was changing into dry clothes near camp and thought I heard someone shout. Not close, but not far either. The kind of sound that's half swallowed by the wind. Half dressed, I kept listening. The woods went still, then nothing. No echo, no second call. I remember waiting for a good minute, thinking maybe another hiker was around, but it never came again, so I figured it was just the wind in the hollows. On another trip, I'd heard the sound of a mountain lion's cry somewhere off the ridge. The sound made my skin crawl. That long, drawn-out scream that sounds almost human. I'd heard recordings before. I knew what it was. But this one, it went on for far too long. 30 seconds, maybe more. Unbroken. No breath, no pause. Just that raw, wailing note that seemed to hang in the air. When it finally stopped, I remembered checking my watch just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. But after a while, the night settled back down, and I figured it maybe had just echoed strange between the peaks. Thinking back on those things right now, I realized none of them had ever led to anything. Nothing had followed me. Nothing had gone wrong. The hunter's story was just that. A story. These mountains are old, and old places carry noises, memories, and fears we build into them. So when I left the diner, the choice felt easy. I folded the map and slipped it back into my pack, deciding to stick with the route I'd planned all along, the same one the hunter warned me off. Maybe I'm just being stubborn, or maybe I just don't like letting other people's ghosts steer me. Before stepping onto the trailhead, I gave the can of bear spray on my strap a reassuring tap, a little ritual I've picked up over the years. I remember that at here, you prepare for the real dangers, not imagined ones. The evening had cooled. The sky above the trees deepened into that pale blue that comes before twilight. The forest waited, still and quiet, and so I continued. The road fell away behind me as I started up the trail again, the last bit of daylight fading fast. The path wound upward through the long stretches of switchbacks and open slopes where the trees thinned just enough for the sky to show through. The air had cooled, carrying that damp, earthy smell that only comes after sundown. The sweet smell of decaying leaves and moss. As I climbed, the forest began to change around me. The daytime birds quieted one by one, their songs giving way to the layered hum of the night. Crickets started first, their rhythms steady and slow. Then came the frogs, distant, uneven calls from somewhere down near the creeks below. Every so often, an owl's low hoot rolled through the dark like a stone skipping across water. It was the kind of quiet you could listen to for hours, where even the small sounds felt deliberate. By the time I reached the upper ridge, the sky had deepened to a dark indigo, the stars just beginning to blink through. I clicked on my headlamp, the beam cutting a clean white path through the trees. The circle of light moved across the trail, catching glints of dew on ferns and pale bark of birch trunks. My breath came in slow, soft clouds. Colder up here. I was just starting to think about how close I must be to my campsite when it happened. A sharp crash to my left, maybe 20 feet off the trail. Branches snapping, leaves thrashing, something fast again. The beam of my light jerked towards the noise, searching the undergrowth. There's nothing there. But all the sounds of the night had stopped. Every cricket, every frog, every owl. Gone in an instant, like someone had pulled the plug on the world. I could hear my pulse in my ears, my breath shallow. I waited, muscles locked, not wanting to move. The seconds dragged. The silence stretched so thin it felt like it would tear. But then, just as suddenly, the forest exhaled. Everything started back up again, tentative at first, then confident. The crickets, then the frogs joining in. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and forced a small laugh. Probably a deer, I muttered to myself, though my voice sounded too loud in the darkness. I pushed on, keeping my light steady and my pace deliberate. It took another half hour to reach the clearing near the ridge where I'd planned to camp. The moon was high enough now that its light spilled silver across the trees, bright enough that I switched off my lamp and let my eyes adjust. The whole forest glowed faintly, every branch edged in soft blue light, the kind of scene that makes you forget how far from the world you are. Setting up the camp in the dark isn't ideal, but I've done it enough to make it second nature. I unpacked the tent, staked the corners, checked the lines, all by the clean light of the moon. It was quiet again. Not the eerie kind of quiet from before, just the steady stillness of the mountains at night. Just as I was rolling out my sleep bag, I heard it again. A faint scurrying in the trees behind me. Not big, but quick. Maybe a raccoon, or something smaller. I paused, listening again. It stopped after a few seconds, then started again, this time a little farther off, like whatever it was had lost interest. I shook my head and smiled. "You picked the wrong tent to mess with tonight," I said softly, half amused. Still, I kept the bear spray close at hand as I crawled into my sleeping bag, the moonlight painting pale shapes across the tent walls. I must have dozed off some time after midnight. The forest had gone still outside, just a soft hiss of the wind moving through the trees and the occasional rustle of something small in the leaves. I remember rolling onto my side, half dreaming about home, when a voice tore through the dark.
It's here!
I jerked upright, heart hammering, the words still hanging in the cold air. I thought I'd dreamed it for a second. Then it came again, farther off but still clear.
It's here!
Come on, hurry up!
I scrambled out of the tent, fumbling with the zipper, the night air biting at my skin. The ridge below was swallowed in darkness, only a faint gleam of moonlight tracing the tops of the trees. The voices came from just over the slope. Several of them now, shouting back and forth.
In the cave! In the cave!
They sounded like men. Deep, urgent. But something was wrong. The tone was off, hollow somehow, like it was coming through a radio, with the tuning just slightly off. Each word stretched too long, the edges fraying in a way that made my skin crawl. My first thought was hunters. Maybe a group running dogs, got turned around. But who hunts this late? And who yells like that in the middle of the night, loud enough to wake the whole ridge? I crouched low beside my tent, listening. The voices carried again, broken by the wind.
It's here! It's here!
Then a pause, long enough that I started to think it was over, before a new sound rose from the trees. The low, throaty croak of a raven. Familiar, ordinary. I felt the tension start to slip from my shoulders. I looked up to where the sound was coming from, one of the trees near the ridge. A raven sat on a branch just a few feet above me, its feathers catching the moonlight like oil on the water, its head tilted slightly, one glossy black eye fixed on mine. Then, clear as a bell, and wrong in every possible way, it called out.
Bullets don't work!
The words were sharp, clipped, human words but flattened, like they'd been learned by repetition rather than understanding. Another voice answered from somewhere in the trees beyond.
Not human!
Another.
Not a deer!
And then a cacophony of them.
In the cave! Here! In the cave! Not a deer! It's here! Bullets don't work! Not human! In the cave! In the cave!
Every hair on my body stood on end. The air felt electric, the forest suddenly alive in a way that was all teeth and shadows. I didn't move. The raven's eyes gleamed down at me unblinking, and in that moment I realized they weren't just repeating what they'd heard. These calls had to serve some sort of purpose. A sudden rustle caught my attention, just at the edge of the tree line below the ridge. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Through the dim moonlight I saw a shadow moving, low at first, then rising, looking up toward the ravens as they continued to squawk and call their strange human-like words. I fumbled with my headlamp, the beam slicing through the darkness, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The light landed on the shadow, and I felt a surge of relief. A deer, like so many I'd passed on the trails before. A little too big to be comfortable, maybe, but nothing I couldn't handle. But then I noticed it. The deer was 30 feet up in a pine, its hooves gripping the bark like claws, its body balanced impossibly on the trunk. It stared right at me, unblinking. The moonlight glinted in its eyes, and in that reflection I realized it wasn't a deer. Not entirely. The shape was wrong, the posture too deliberate. The way it hung there, almost like it had climbed purposely rather than leapt. My breath caught. I almost let out a nervous laugh, until it shifted its head and its gaze locked onto mine. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to bolt, but my legs refused. I could only stare back, heart hammering in my chest as the impossible unfolded. Then, without warning, its head plunged down the trunk. The sound of snapping bark and scraping hooves made me flinch violently. My light followed it, but there was nothing to see, only the deep shadows of the pine and the tree line beyond. But then the sound found my ears. A wet, heavy scraping sound climbing. Fast. Somewhere between the thud of hooves and the rending bark, it was coming up the ridge. Toward me. I stumbled a step back, the world narrowing to the sound and the frozen impossibility of what I had just seen. My fingers gripped the bear spray. Knuckles white, but my mind was already racing, trying to understand what could climb like that, and why it had chosen now that the voices and the ravens had pinned me in place. Rather than face what was coming up that ridge and test whether the bear spray would work, I just ran. Tent, pack, everything, I left it all behind. My light was clutched in my hand, my only anchor in the darkness, swinging wildly as I barreled down the ridge. Behind me the voices rose again, frantic and disjointed, coming from everywhere at once. I could hear the raven calls cutting through them, sharp and mocking, like guides herding that impossible thing towards me. I skidded over fallen logs, ducked under low-hanging branches, pounding down the steep slopes as fast as my legs could carry me. My lungs burned, my heart felt like it would tear from my chest, but I didn't stop. Something in the woods was gaining. That wet, scraping sound that made my stomach twist, and I could hear it close in for a moment before it vanished, lost as I leapt over a narrow creek. The trail seemed endless. For what felt like hours, I ran through the dark forest, the intermittent voices chasing me, then fading, then reappearing closer. My legs ached, my muscles screamed, and I still ran, driven by a mix of fear and pure adrenaline. Finally, the trees thinned. The forest gave way to the old service road I had passed earlier. My chest heaving, my clothes drenched in sweat, I stumbled onto the asphalt, still clutching the flashlight. The world was quiet. The forest noises, the voices, even the ravens. Everything had stopped. I leaned against the guardrail, trying to catch my breath, the adrenaline slowly leaking out of me in shaky, uneven gasps. Darkness stretched out in every direction. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. Minutes passed, though it could have been longer. Then, up the road, I saw the faint glow of headlights. A car moving slow, engine humming. I waved frantically, stumbling into the road as it rolled to a stop. The driver leaned over, concerned. I didn't wait to calm down. I spilled everything, the voices, the ravens, the deer climbing the pine, words tumbling out faster than I could organize them. The driver just listened, eyes wide but calm, nodding as I rattled on. When I finally stopped, my chest heaving, the man said nothing except hop in. I climbed into the car, trembling, glancing back once at the dark forest behind us. Nothing moved, and nothing called. The mountains loomed quietly, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I don't know what it was that chased me. I'm not sure I want to know. All I do know is that the next time I come here, if I do, I won't just be bringing bear spray.